Chapter 1439, The Call of the Emperor. The call came, not from Meng Hao himself, but from the bronze lamp inside of him. At the same time, he opened his third eye, causing brilliant light to shine out, filling the world. Something else happened that was extremely telling. As the light and the call spread out, heaven and earth began to shake, and Jin Yunqian could do nothing to stop it. Jin Yunqian's face instantly fell. Meng Hao hovered in midair like a divine spirit, majestic light shining out from this third eye. Using that third eye to look at the world around him, he saw so many ghosts that they seemed infinite in number. Back when they were alive, they had lived in a thriving world that ended when it was destroyed by All Heaven's finger. As such, it could be said that the true masters of the necropolis were these ghosts. When Meng Hao opened his third eye, sending out divine will in the form of brilliant light, it coupled with the call from the bronze lamp to spread out silently through the entire landmass. In that moment, all of the ghosts which had previously prostrated themselves in worship to Meng Hao suddenly shivered and looked up, confused expressions in their eyes. Who is it that calls to us? That's the aura of the Emperor, the fluctuations of the Emperor. The Emperor is calling to us. Their voices could not be heard by the living, nor could the ghosts themselves even be seen. However, the living beings present could sense the fluctuations emanating out because of the ghosts. Only the ghosts themselves could hear their voices, which grew louder and louder until they were like a gigantic sound wave. Even the ghosts which were not on the land mass were shivering, and gleams of excitement could be seen in their eyes. Their howls filled every nook and cranny of the enormous continent, along with an icy aura. The ghosts took to flight, sending out coldness that could freeze anything and everything. They were beginning to go mad because of the call they felt from their emperor. The Emperor, that's the aura of the Emperor, he's calling to us. The seemingly infinite numbers of ghosts outside of the landmass caused cracking sounds to ring out as ice spread out to cover the ruins in the area. Innumerable hordes of ghosts surged forth like a shocking wave to sweep across the bridge that connected to the first landmass. Countless howling voices rose up. Anything which blocks our path to pay greetings to the Emperor shall be destroyed. A terrifying, piercing cry rang out from the mists that surrounded the bridge. Before the mists could disperse, the icy coldness and hosts of ghosts crushed them. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the bridge trembled. The arms of blood and gore that made up the bridge were frozen, and within the space of a few breaths of time, the bridge itself was nothing more than ice as the ghosts outside rushed onto the landmass. Even as that happened, more and more ghosts began to appear within the ruins on the surface of the land mass itself. At first, they looked confused, but when they felt the call coming from Meng Hao, their hearts stirred with excitement. Soon, all of the ghosts within all of the ruins and districts looked up and began to cry out. It's the Emperor. The aura of the Emperor. The Emperor isn't dead after all, he's come back. The Emperor is calling to us. Are you MMMBLLLE? All of the ghosts both on the land mass and outside of it were surging toward the central region, where Meng Hao was. Within the ruins of a certain temple, a shocking aura suddenly appeared, along with a vague, blurry figure. He looked different than the other ghosts, more ancient. As he looked off into the distance, a powerful energy surged off of him. The Emperor is back, he murmured. He made a grasping gesture with his right hand, causing a soul pike to appear in his hand. Then he transformed into a blast of cold air that shot off into the distance. In another area was a river, which began to churn as a vicious face rose up from within it. When its eyes opened, they looked around blankly for a moment before filling with excitement. The Emperor, it's the Emperor. Trembling, he flew out of the water. This ghost was fully 30,000 meters long, causing everything to shake as he flew at top speed in the direction of Meng Hao's calling. In a location even further off was a towering mountain, atop which stood a man in a flowing white robe. He was a ghost, and yet he still possessed his own will and mind. Shivering, he turned his head and looked off into the distance with an expression of disbelief. Then he started laughing in mad excitement. He's not the Emperor, but he represents the Emperor. He flew into motion, icy coldness spreading out from him as he headed off into the distance. Scenes like this played out in numerous locations all over the first continent. As the ghosts took to flight, rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth, and the entire world shook. Within the first land mass of the necropolis, icy coldness spread out. In fact, if one could look down from a high vantage point, it would look like the entire land mass was turning into ice. The ruins iced over, the mountains froze, the rivers turned solid, countless plants and even the wind itself began to freeze up. As the world trembled, the people standing outside of the altar felt icy coldness and astonishment rising up within them. What's happening? Something's wrong. Things got freezing almost instantly. In their shock, they looked around and saw snow swirling about in the air. However, this snow wasn't white, it was black. Of course, what Meng Hao was seeing wasn't snow, but rather countless ghosts. Before, he had never truly called upon the ghosts within the necropolis, not of his own accord. He hovered there in midair, arms spread wide as boundless iciness spread out. Cracking sounds filled the air as countless ghosts swirled around him. None of the living beings could see the ghosts, but they could sense what was happening. They could detect the countless shocking auras building up around Meng Hao, and could tell that there were invisible figures surrounding him. However, Jin Yunqian was different. Because of the void divinity state he was in, he was fused with the world itself. He was the world and the world was him. Therefore, he could see all of the countless ghosts flying around him and Meng Hao. Then he watched in shock as the ghosts began to prostrate toward Meng Hao, eyes burning with passion and excitement. Greetings, Emperor. Greetings, Emperor. Greetings, Emperor. Countless voices rose up in a cacophony that shook the starry sky, a massive sound wave that boomed like thunder. Impossible. Jin Yunqian was astonished to the ultimate degree and was shaking violently. What was happening was completely and utterly shocking. He almost couldn't even believe what he was seeing. More and more ghosts appeared, filling the area for tens of thousands of kilometers in all directions, all of them prostrating with zealous fanaticism. There were even some entities which were shocking to Jin Yunqian on an individual level, which likewise prostrated to Meng Hao. Jin Yunqian was so shaken that his forehead began to drip with sweat. Meng Hao was being worshipped by an innumerable group of ghosts, as if he were their emperor. His eyes were cold as he looked around, and the cultivators who met his gaze were completely shaken mentally. It was as if they were being struck by lightning or frozen into ice. Shaking in astonishment, the sect leader rose to his feet, and off to the side, Sha Jiudong gasped in shock. They were both in the peak of 9 essences, and although they were not in the midst of the void divinity conversion and could not see the ghosts, their divine sense could clearly detect the countless ghosts which Meng Hao had called from both within and without the land mass. The entire area was completely and utterly filled with ghostly spirits. And then there was the freezing temperature, which caused both of them to inhale sharply. If they had such a reaction, it was hardly necessary to detail how Shangyuan Hong and the other 9 essences cultivators reacted, or the 8 essences paragons. All of them felt their minds spinning in astonishment. The battle between Meng Hao and Jin Yunqian had reached a complete and utter peak. Jin Yunqian's scalp tingled with numbness. He simply couldn't find a way to believe that even his void divinity conversion had not forced Meng Hao to use his 9th essence, but instead prompted him to summon an army of infinite ghosts. "Who are you?" he shrieked. As his voice echoed out, Meng Hao extended his right hand. He could clearly sense that as of this moment, although he wasn't truly the emperor of this land, he was the commander of these legions of ghosts. The world didn't belong to him, but that didn't matter. He could simply conquer it. He lowered his hand, and the swish of his sleeve sent his will out to the countless ghosts. The ghosts then looked up at Jin Yunqian, screamed, and charged toward him. Jin Yunqian's mind trembled, and the sensation of deadly crisis which filled him grew even more intense. He had no time to think of what to do. He could only grit his teeth and unleash all of the power of the void divinity conversion, sending the power of the world to fight back against the ghosts. However, there was one thing he hadn't considered. Although he had already used the void divinity conversion to become the world itself, that world, both before the great catastrophe which had struck it and after, had always belonged to this group. In the past they had been cultivators, but now they were vengeful ghosts. Chapter 1440, The 5 Potentates. The shocking scene which was playing out in front of the cultivators of the vast expanse school was something that they would never be able to forget for the rest of their lives. It signified that a 5th potentate had appeared on planet Vast Expanse. Before this moment, the planet had 4 peak 9 essences cultivators, like 4 potentates who no one could possibly shake. Each one of them were at the pinnacle of existence. That group of 4 consisted of Sha Jiudong, Jin Yunqian, the sect leader, and immortal Bai Wuqian. They were the most powerful experts on planet Vast Expanse, and were all on the cusp of reaching transcendence. All other 9 essences cultivators had no choice but to bow their heads in deference to them. But after this battle between Meng Hao and Jin Yunqian, in which Meng Hao transformed into a black rock, in which he unleashed the combined 8 hexes. Everyone was completely shaken. Most shocking was what was playing out right at this moment. The world itself attacked, and countless ghosts screamed. Up to now, Jin Yunqian had mostly maintained the upper hand, but at the moment, blood was spurting out of his wounds as he was battered by an unending stream of ghosts. He was tottering on the verge of collapse, and the essences which he had dispersed into the world were now experiencing an intense force of expulsion. The wind was expelling them, the 5 elements were expelling them, and it was the same with the land, the sky, and the lightning. The entire world burst with a force of expulsion. Rumbling could be heard as blood sprayed out of Jin Yunqian's mouth. He tumbled backward, countless ghosts battering at him in complete madness. The air around him twisted and distorted, and Jin Yunqian's face was completely ashen as he cried out miserably. There was literally nothing he could do to change what was happening. The sensation of deadly crisis within him had reached a fever pitch. There was nothing he could do to fight back, and in fact, he couldn't even struggle. He might have become the world, but these ghosts were the collective master of that world. And the emperor of those ghosts was Meng Hao. Meng Hao's will represented the will of all the ghosts. Massive booms rang out. As the surroundings were physically shaken, Jin Yunqian was mentally shaken. The essence he had inserted into the wind was being ejected, and before he could do anything to solidify it, a boom echoed out in his mind, and blood sprayed out of his mouth as that essence was gone. In the blink of an eye, his control over the world was no longer harmonious, and the wind did not belong to him. "Who are you?" Jin Yunqian cried, looking at Meng Hao with complete disbelief. "Just who exactly are you?" As he fell back, the ghosts continued to attack him with complete insanity. It wasn't that he hadn't been aware of what happened in the void outside the land mass, when the masses of ghosts rushed forth to offer worship to Meng Hao. The main difference was that the sheer numbers involved couldn't be compared to each other any more than the light of a firefly could compare to that of the full moon. He simply couldn't fathom how Meng Hao was possibly capable of such a thing. Even more terrifying was that the number of ghosts only continued to increase, which caused Jin Yunqian's scalp to tingle in fear. It was then that the land began to quake, and Jin Yunqian felt the essence he had inserted into it being shaken in violent fashion. Then the fusion between himself and the land was violently ripped apart. Jin Yunqian felt as if his mind were being torn, and he yet again coughed up a mouthful of blood. Unfortunately for him, there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop any of the things that were happening. He could only look on as his third essence, which he had sent into the plants, was forcibly ejected. Then his murderous fourth essence, which had merged into the world's fire, experienced the same thing. After that was the water in the world. After those essences were rejected, the tearing sensation that he felt grew more intense, until he felt completely disharmonious with the entire world. The ghosts were screaming as they swirled around. Among the army were some especially terrifying figures who swept the ghosts forth in attack, giving Jin Yunqian no choice but to continue to fall back. Then his 8th essence, which he had merged into the sky, was slashed at as if by an invisible blade, cleaving it away. Then was his 9th essence, which was in the lightning. Jin Yunqian coughed up a massive mouthful of blood, and his body sagged listlessly. He was no longer mostly transparent, but instead had been completely rejected by the world. He almost looked as if he had been crushed by a gigantic foot. His most powerful trump card, the Void Divinity Conversion, was crushed like a wet twig by the simple wave of a hand by Meng Hao. He didn't even have the power to fight back. "If you weren't in this place, you couldn't do any of this," Jin Yunqian shrieked. After having been rejected by the world, Jin Yunqian fell back again, and yet the ghosts didn't stop attacking him. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with the desire to kill, and he extended his right hand and then pointed toward Jin Yunqian. That caused the ghosts to go mad with even more killing intent than before, and rumble toward Jin Yunqian in attack. "No," he screamed. An extraordinary sensation of deadly crisis raged within him. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing countless shield layers to spring up around him. The shields shattered one by one, and he was shoved backward, an unyielding and yet despairing look on his pale face. Actually, he had spoken correctly just now. Meng Hao would have had a very difficult time dealing with his magical technique were he not in this specific location. Furthermore, he would have been forced to pay a steep price to do so, not simply wave his hand casually as he had just done. Rumbling echoed out as the shield surrounding Jin Yunqian collapsed. It was at this point that the sect leader suddenly flew into motion to appear next to Jin Yunqian. He waved his sleeve, unleashing his Peak 9 Essence's cultivation base power to protect him against the murderous ghosts. At the same time, Sha Jiudong leaped forward, appearing on the other side of Jin Yunchen. His expression was somber as he similarly waved his hand, unleashing cultivation base power that caused a massive sandstorm to rise up to defend Jin Yunchen. But even the combined power of all three of these powerful experts was not enough to rattle the endless army of ghosts. They began to fall back under the battering of the ghosts, their chi and blood boiling, their cultivation bases trembling. "What are the rest of you doing?" barked the sect leader, his voice urgent. "Are you just waiting to see fellow Taoist Jin get killed? Old Ninth, stay your hand." Shang Yuanhong didn't say anything, but bitterness filled his heart. He and the others present gritted their teeth and flew out to appear around Jin Yunchen. They poured their own power into the defense effort, unleashing their cultivation bases, creating an intense tempest of force to block the ghosts. That combined force managed to halt the ghosts momentarily. However, these ghosts represented the life force of the entire land mass, and also contained some entities which were extremely powerful. As they continued to attack the tempest of power, it began to flicker like a flame on the verge of being snuffed out. Meng Hao hovered there in the air, a bit unsettled at how things were proceeding as he watched everything that was happening. The ghosts of the necropolis were inherently powerful, which Meng Hao assumed had something to do with the cause of their deaths. "Old Ninth, we need fellow Taoist Jin," the sect leader said, looking up at Meng Hao. "His magical techniques and divine abilities will help us in the land masses beyond this one. If he perishes here, it will be far, far more difficult to reach the ninth land mass." Jin Yunchen maintained his silence. His face was ashen as he looked at Meng Hao, mixed emotions clearly visible. Although he didn't want to back down, he knew that if he didn't, it was highly likely that he would perish. Finally, he sighed. He was a decisive person, and although he could tell that Meng Hao seemed unwilling to rest until he was dead, he ignored that, clasped his hands and bowed to Meng Hao. He spoke no words, simply relying on his actions to explain his attitude. Meng Hao frowned. While it was true that he wanted Jin Yunchen dead, and to do that would be a difficult thing once they left the necropolis, the truth was if he actually killed him right here and now, it would earn the ire of everyone else from the vast expanse school. That was not an outcome he would willingly choose. Even as he considered the matter, the sect leader gritted his teeth and once again spoke out. "Old Ninth, I can understand that you have some misgivings. Therefore, I hereby swear a Taoist oath that if Jin Yunchen provokes you again, I will stand by your side to crush him." "As do I," Sha Jiudong said. As of this moment, he had no choice other than to adjust his appraisal of Meng Hao. This battle had proved that he truly qualified to stand on equal footing with the other four potentates. Jin Yunchen smiled bitterly and nodded his head. Seeing all that, Meng Hao still wanted to kill him, but after considering the matter, he quashed the idea. "Since that's the case, we'll let the matter drop," Meng Hao said coolly. "However, I can't let things go as simply as that. I almost got killed just now. Fellow Taoist Jin, I demand penance." Jin Yunchen sighed inwardly. He knew that Meng Hao had the upper hand now, and that there was nothing he could do to fight back against him. Gritting his teeth, he made a grasping motion, causing a bracelet to appear out of thin air. "Take this, fellow Taoist Meng. This should make up for what happened here." He waved his hand, sending the bracelet flying out of the tempest to hover in front of Meng Hao. Meng Hao scanned it with divine sense and found that it contained a holding pocket filled with countless immortal jades, as well as numerous other precious materials. After looking it over, he nodded and put it away. With that, he waved his sleeve, causing the ghosts to retreat, bowing to him the entire time. Meng Hao hovered there like the emperor of the entire world. The group from the vast expanse school would never forget what had just occurred. This battle had propelled Meng Hao from being the ninth paragon into being one of 5 potentates of planet vast expanse. His position was now just as high as the sect leaders. In fact, his battle with Jin Yunchen ensured that none of the powerful experts of the vast expanse school would ever dare to offend him, at least not within the necropolis. Meng Hao was powerful outside the necropolis, but once inside he had shown that he was the monarch. The army of ghosts made him invincible to anyone who had not transcended. Chapter 1441, Transcendence Deus. After a quiet moment, Meng Hao put the bracelet away, and slowly, his killing intent faded. Everyone breathed sighs of relief. Jin Yunchen's expression was very unsightly, but contained no hatred. He silently made his way a bit off into the distance, where he sat down cross-legged to meditate. Sha Jiudong and the sect leader shared a hesitant look, then headed over to Jin Yunshin's side, where they also sat down. It appeared as if they were there to offer protection, but even Jin Yunshin knew that they were also there to keep him in check if necessary. They would protect him if Meng Hao's killing intent suddenly ignited again, but they would likewise make sure that Jin Yunshin didn't do anything to the detriment of Meng Hao. The fight just now proved that Meng Hao had the right to be one of the potentates, and neither Sha Jiudong nor the sect leader had any desire for any more negative repercussions. The best thing was that the matter be dropped. The ghosts didn't disperse. After Meng Hao closed his third eye, they remained floating in the area, seemingly ready to spring into action the moment Meng Hao called them again. "Fellow Taoist Ninth Paragon," said the sect leader, "this matter stemmed from fellow Taoist Jin's hot-headedness. That's true of both the incident on the bridge and what happened here. However, he wasn't completely in the wrong. There's been a bit of a misunderstanding here. Even I was able to sense that there is a certain lingering will within the world of the necropolis. I personally do not think that it is the will of Patriarch Vast Expanse, but fellow Taoist Jin was convinced that it was. Fellow Taoist Ninth, I think it's safe to assume that you sense it too. It's a killing intent that is directed at you. That is one of the reasons why fellow Taoist Jin attacked you. He was under the belief that the will of Patriarch Vast Expanse wanted you dead. He believed that by killing you, he could please the Patriarch and perhaps be benefited in the seeking of enlightenment. It was in this manner that the sect leader explained why exactly Jin Yunshin had attacked Meng Hao. Meng Hao's expression flickered upon hearing the explanation. After a moment of thought, he sent some divine sense into the land. Then, he nodded thoughtfully, although he declined to comment. The sect leader didn't seem to want to discuss the matter further. Changing topics, he pointed at the altar. "Fellow Taoist Ninth Paragon," he said with a smile, "this altar is the location of transcendence here in the necropolis. There are 9 lands here, each one of which has an altar just like this one. Supposedly, the altars are connected to Patriarch Vast Expanse, and were actually created by him countless years in the past. As for the specific details of the matter, even after combing through the ancient records, I wasn't able to find many clues. However, transcendence is definitely possible here. Before you arrived just now, fellow Taoists Jin, Sha, and myself managed to acquire a bit of enlightenment. However, we're still quite a ways away from a breakthrough." As he spoke, he approached Meng Hao, seeming very much at ease. It was a sharp contrast from only a few moments before. Although he had treated Meng Hao well in the past, he now viewed him as more of an equal, and his tone of voice was far more sincere than before. "Time is very limited right now. Fellow Taoist Ninth Paragon, why don't you try to gain some enlightenment from the altar? It's impossible to say how lucky you will get, but you should try. As for the other fellow Taoists, if you don't mind, I hope that you can allow them to step onto the altar as well to try to reach enlightenment. After all, we don't have much time." With that, the sect leader clasped hands and bowed. Meng Hao thought for a moment, then nodded. "That will be fine," he said with a slight smile. Waving his sleeve, he flew over to the altar. He immediately noticed how that there were certain strange properties to the altar, something he hadn't taken note of before. Without any hesitation, he sat down cross-legged in the very middle. Even as he did, the other cultivators from the Vast Expanse school took deep breaths and followed. They looked beyond excited at their chance. Before, they had only been able to wait outside of the altar as they stood as Dharma protectors for the 3 potentates. At that time, they hadn't been permitted to even get close, but now, they had their chance to step onto it. Although Meng Hao was there on the altar, none of them had offended him, so as long as they acted respectfully, they would not incite any of his killing intent. One by one they flew over. After clasping hands and bowing to Meng Hao, they all chose locations to sit down cross-legged and meditate. In addition to Shangyu and Hong and the other 9 Essences Paragons, there were the subordinates, the 8 Essences Paragons. All of them came, even Meng Hao's 2 8 Essences subordinates. His 2 subordinates had a bit of a different standing now. As the subordinates of the 9th Paragon, they felt the least pressure of anyone. They sat down cross-legged on either side of Meng Hao to stand as Dharma protectors as he sought enlightenment. The sect leader's expression was very solemn as he sat down cross-legged between Jin Yunshin and the altar. Although it seemed like a random position, both Meng Hao and Jin Yunshin could read between the lines. He was demanding stability and no fighting. Jin Yunshin sighed inwardly. Actually, he had long since quelled any notions of trying to fight Meng Hao. The ghost still existed, and he knew that if he made a move, he would most likely be killed in body and spirit. I wonder how many days this Meng Hao will be able to continue to seek enlightenment on the altar, he thought. This place is not as simple as it appears on the surface. The longer you sustain the effort of seeking enlightenment, the more you will gain. However, everyone has their limit. He might hold the higher ground in terms of fighting, but the altar requires personal enlightenment and good fortune. It has a lot to do with cultivation base level as well. I bet Meng Hao will last no more than 5 days, he snorted coldly. He himself had lasted for 7 days on the altar before reaching his limit. Even if Meng Hao hadn't appeared when he did, he would still have awoken from his seeking of enlightenment. The sect leader and Shajiudong had lasted for similar lengths of time, 7 days. At the moment, Jin Yunchen wasn't the only one who was pondering how long Meng Hao might last. Shajiudong was thinking about the same thing. Even the sect leader was contemplating the matter. Although his expression was placid, his eyes gleamed with thought as he looked over at Meng Hao. The altar was completely silent, as dozens of people sat down cross-legged and closed their eyes to seek enlightenment. As soon as Meng Hao's eyes closed, rumbling sounds filled his mind as he was connected to the altar. He instantly sensed his thought processes speeding up, whereas his qi and blood began to slow. Even his cultivation base became extremely calm. However, his divine sense and his mental faculties all began to spin at 10 times their normal speed. Apparently, meditating on this altar focused one's power in a way that made it easier to grope for understanding regarding transcendence. It was as if he were gazing at the starry sky, at the heavenly bodies, at the transformations of the world, at the flow of time, at the beginning and end of all living things. He was looking at everything. It was his first time experiencing visions such as these, but it was not his first time experiencing such a mental journey. Actually, this experience was very much like what he had gone through when looking at the frescoes in the tunnel. The hexing magics inside of him, which were in the midst of turning into essences, experienced a sudden acceleration in the process. After a long moment passed, Meng Hao reined his thought processes in. Inwardly, he was shaken. This altar serves to bless the power of one's enlightenment. It can be used to propel one from 8 essences to 9, and can also aid in moving from 9 essences into transcendence. At the moment, the most important thing for me is not transcendence, but rather the creation of my 9th hex, and subsequently my 9th essence. I will use this altar to gain enlightenment of my 9th hex. Rumbling filled his mind as he focused his thoughts, cast aside any distractions, and focused completely on seeking enlightenment of the 9th hex. This was not his first time contemplating that particular hex. Quite the contrary, he had long since begun to make preparations for it. My 9th hex will be molded upon the seal the heavens incantation. It will form the seal the heavens hex. Meng Hao felt as if thunder were crashing inside of his mind. As his thoughts focused, the aura of transcendence rose up within him. Gradually, a wind sprang up which began to swirl around him. His mind was completely occupied with seeking enlightenment regarding the seal the heavens hex. He would take the seal the heavens incantation and elevate it from being a magical technique or divine ability into being a hexing magic. Once that was branded into his soul, it would become the 9th demon sealing hex. Normally speaking, if he wanted to successfully accomplish such a task, it would take a very long time. However, with this altar, he could increase that speed exponentially. Time passed. After the first day went by, different fluctuations were emanating off of different cultivators. The 8 essences paragons were radiating auras of the 9 essences level, and the 9 essences paragons were emanating a feeling of transcendence. Various expressions were flashing across their faces. Some people seemed enraptured, some confused, some regretful, some grim. On the second day, some of the 8 essences paragons began to tremble and sweat profusely. Pained expressions could be seen on their faces, but they held on bitterly. On the third day, all of the 8 essences paragons were clearly on the verge of giving up. Only the 9 essences paragons were still completely focused on enlightenment. On the evening of the third day, one of the 8 essences paragons opened his eyes, and blood oozed out of his mouth as he flew off the altar. He looked back at everyone else on the altar, his expression conflicted as he sighed inwardly. However, after a moment, his eyes gleamed. Having endured for 3 days, his gains were significant. Soon more 8 essences paragons opened their eyes and then flew off of the altar, blood oozing out of their mouths. After enduring until they couldn't do so anymore, they had no choice but to remove themselves from the area of the altar. By midnight on that third day, all of the 8 essences paragons had awoken from their trances and left the altar. Left behind were only 7 people. Meng Hao, and the other 9 essences paragons of the vast expanse school. Jin Yunshan's face was calm, but inwardly he was laughing coldly. He'll hold out for 2 more days at the most. As for everyone else, they'll awaken tomorrow. Chapter 1442, he won't last 5 days. Jin Yunshan was definitely not the only person paying close attention to what was happening on the altar. The sect leader and Sha Jiudong were similarly focused. The surrounding 8 essences paragons were also paying close attention, with occasional looks of envy flickering across their faces, as well as anticipation. The 9th paragon is definitely going to hold on for the longest. I just wonder how many days that will be. Time proceeded to flow onward. By the time the 4th day arrived, 3 of the group of 7 were trembling, clearly on the verge of opening their eyes. Whether or not they were willing, the aura of awakening grew more and more intense upon them. The 7th, 5th, and 4th paragons have cultivation bases slightly weaker than the others. I'm afraid they won't last for longer than 4 days. Whispered conversations were taking place among the surrounding audience. Meng Hao's expression was calm, but in his mind, the enlightenment regarding the Seal the Heavens hex had placed him into a very perilous situation. Thanks to the increased power of enlightenment, he now fully comprehended the Seal the Heavens incantation. If anyone were able to see inside of him, they would see a shocking sealing mark gradually forming. Surrounding that sealing mark were 8 other magical symbols that looked very similar to it. Those were the other demon sealing hexes. From the look of it, the 9th hex was now about 70% complete. There were threads that snaked out from that 9th sealing mark, which spread out to fill Meng Hao's body. As they did, they made contact with strands of immortal qi within him that had been severed during the process of being defiled and becoming the demon. Every thread that spread out from the sealing mark completed one of those threads of immortal qi. The more immortal qi that filled him, the stronger the sensation of transcendence grew. Apparently, the appearance of the 9th hex could help Meng Hao to proceed along the path of immortality which had previously vanished. The mark of the 9th hex gradually caused more and more immortal qi to converge, causing him to radiate the air of an immortal. Time passed by hour. Soon, half of the 4th day was gone, and the 3 trembling 9 essences paragons slowly opened their eyes. After exchanging mutual glances, they sighed and removed themselves from the altar. They had made various gains, but were the first among the 9 essences paragons to have to leave the altar. Although that lost them a bit of face, there was nothing they could do about it. Outside of the altar, they sat down cross-legged and continued to observe the other 4 who had remained behind. Of those 4, 3 were trembling, with Meng Hao being the only person who looked the same as before. As the 4th day ended and the 5th day approached, another of the 9 essences paragons opened his eyes. At first, a blank look could be seen, but soon he sighed and left the altar. In almost that exact moment, the 5th day arrived. As of this moment, there were only 3 people left on the altar, including Meng Hao. Among the 9 paragons, the 2nd and 3rd paragons were second in power only to the sect leader. The 5th day had arrived, and they might be trembling, but having reached this point in their search for enlightenment, their auras of transcendence were strong. The 5th day has arrived. There are only 3 left. I wonder which one will last the longest. The sect leader lasted for 7 days, as did fellow Taoists Jin and Sha. 7 days is the limit. I'd be willing to bet that the 2nd and 3rd paragons both awakened today. As for the 9th paragon, he might last for 6 days. In fact, 7 days isn't necessarily an impossibility. Even as everyone discussed the matter, Meng Hao suddenly trembled visibly. Although the movement was slight, everyone was paying close attention and instantly noticed. What could it be that the 9th paragon is going to awaken now? But it's only been 5 days. His fight with fellow Taoist Jin proved that he qualifies to be one of the potentates. How could he awaken after only 5 days? Everyone seemed shocked, but Jin Yunshan's lips were turned up in a cold smile. He was certain of his judgment in the matter. After reviewing his battle with Meng Hao over the course of the past few days, he was more convinced than ever that there was something very strange about Meng Hao's cultivation base. That strange aspect was that he didn't seem to truly have 9 essences. If he did, Jin Yunshan was confident that he would have been able to force him to use it. Perhaps he simply used some special technique to unleash the battle prowess of the 9 essences level, he thought, but in reality, his cultivation base is only at the 8 essences level. If that's true, then he doesn't qualify to be one of the potentates. Jin Yunshan's eyes flickered, and his cold smile grew wider. Jiudong and the sect leader also had strange expressions on their faces as they studied Meng Hao. They were quite shocked that he was already showing signs of awakening even though it was only the 5th day. Time passed. Soon, half of the 5th day had gone by. The third paragon coughed up a mouthful of blood and then opened his eyes. After a moment passed, he shook his head, and yet his expression was one of excitement as he rose to his feet and left the altar. Not long after that, the second paragon sagged listlessly. His body was extremely withered, and the aura of awakening upon him was strong, and yet unexpectedly. He calmly continued. That caused a buzz of conversation among the onlookers, especially when they realized that Meng Hao was trembling even more than the second paragon was, and the aura of awakening upon him seemed to surpass the air of transcendence. Strange looks appeared on their faces. What's going on? The 9th paragon can't even hold on for 5 days. Could it be? Could it be because he sustained internal injuries? There's another possibility. What if the reason he never used his 9th essence is because he doesn't actually have a 9th essence? Everyone present was a paragon, adept at analysis and skilled in scheming. It wasn't long before everyone was contemplating the matter in such a way. If Meng Hao really did awaken on the 5th day, then his newly acquired qualification to be one of the potentates would become a matter of skepticism. Although no one would say anything out loud, once he got back to the sect, he would be faced with many difficulties. It was at this point that Meng Hao began to tremble even harder than before, and the aura of awakening grew stronger and clearer. Even his mind was battered with waves of shock. Why is this happening? He roared inwardly. This is impossible. His divine sense was completely converged onto the sealing mark of the 9th hex. That mark had come to be 99% complete on the previous day, and the thread spreading out from it had filled his body. The 9th hex was almost complete, and his cultivation base was poised on the brink of rising. However, even in that moment of keen anticipation, the sealing mark of the 9th hex unexpectedly began to break apart. Closer examination confirmed that it was true. The sealing mark really was breaking apart, without any warning or indication as to why. Over the course of a few hours, more than half of it collapsed, causing rumbling sounds to fill Meng Hao. That was the reason why he was shaking. At the same time, a powerful force was apparently attempting to wrench him out of his state of enlightenment. Meng Hao's reserves of power ran deep. He had Shui Dongliu's legacy, and even more importantly, the bronze lamp. As that powerful force attempted to force him out of enlightenment and into awakening, the bronze lamp began to emit a soft glow, which negated that power. However, he continued to tremble, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. Everyone watched as this happened. Meng Hao shook violently, and in the end, blood began to drip down off of his chin. It was in that moment that the second paragon suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood and shivered. As the blood oozed down, he sat there for a moment, then struggled to his feet. However, instead of looking as though he had been defeated, he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. As he stepped off of the altar, astonishingly, he emanated the aura of the peak of 9 essences. That aura instantly attracted the shocked attention of everyone in the area. The sect leader, Sha Jiudong, and Jin Yunqian all looked over. The second paragon truly had acquired good fortune from the altar. Although he hadn't reached transcendence, his cultivation base had advanced by half a step, placing him at the peak of the 9 essences level. Instantly, expressions of congratulations began to ring out. The sect leader smiled and clasped hands meaningfully. The excited second paragon took a deep breath, then suddenly looked back over at Meng Hao, and within his eyes flickered the desire to do battle. If Meng Hao could become one of the 5 potentates, then he was confident that he could do the same. That was especially true considering the fact that despite Meng Hao being the only person left on the altar, he was shaking visibly. That was the source of the second paragon's confidence, and was also why everyone else was paying such close attention to what was happening. Jin Yunqian suddenly chuckled. He won't be able to last longer than 5 days, he said. We're only a few hours from being finished here. As his voice echoed out, Sha Jiudong frowned, and a look of doubt appeared in the sect leader's eyes. Everyone looked on silently, unwilling to speak. All eyes were focused on Meng Hao. Time passed. Meng Hao's mind was in chaos. He glared at the motes of light which were the shattered bits of his 9th hex as they slowly floated out into his body. After some thought, he began to calm his thoughts. There were no faults in either my plan or how I carried it out. Transforming the seal, the heaven's incantation, into my 9th hex was the right decision. Furthermore, during the process of enlightenment, My understanding of the seal the heavens incantation went far past the previous level. I even managed to converge the hex smoothly. So why did I fail in the end? I need to try again and determine the reason. What caused the conversion of my ninth hex to fail? Having made his determination, he didn't hesitate to start gathering together motes of light that were the ninth hex, simultaneously drawing upon the power of the altar to speed up the enlightenment process. As the motes of light gathered, the sealing mark of the ninth hex gradually began to reform. This time, Meng Hao went about the process with more caution. Every breath of time that passed, he was completely focused and made sure to avoid any mistakes. After reaching various levels of enlightenment, he used the resulting knowledge in the creation of the ninth hex. Time passed, 2 hours, 4 hours. Rumbling could be heard inside of him, and once again he began to tremble. It was then that the fifth day ended. Chapter 1443, Difficulty Completing the Ninth Hex. When the fifth day passed, Jin Yunchen did not look happy at all. In fact, it was almost as if he had just been slapped by an invisible hand. A few hours before, he had boldly asserted that Meng Hao wouldn't last for 5 days. But here Meng Hao was, still sitting there and calmly at that, with no more trembling. The scene left him very grim-faced. As for everyone else present, strange expressions could be seen on their faces. Regardless, the suspicions people had regarding Meng Hao were now deeply rooted within them. Even if he lasted for 6 days, they would still have their misgivings. Unless he could pull off a miracle, something so astonishing that it would drive away any lingering suspicions. If Meng Hao did so, then his status and grandeur would reach an unimaginable level. 6 days is his limit, Jin Yunchen growled. His words were met with silence as everyone focused on watching Meng Hao. 2 hours passed. 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. As the 14th hour passed, the grimness in Jin Yunchen's face deepened. Everyone else had strange expressions as they watched Meng Hao. What was happening with his ninth essence left many of them rattled. Soon 16 hours had passed, then 18. Finally, 24 hours went by. A collective gasp could be heard. 7 days. Something strange is going on with the ninth paragon. He was clearly on the verge of waking up, but then he lasted for an entire additional day. True, but 7 days is probably his limit. As people discussed the matter, Jin Yunchen's face was as pale as ash. He couldn't feel more gloomy. He had openly said 5 days was Meng Hao's limit, only to have him last 6 days. Then he said 6 days was the limit, and he lasted for 7. He also noticed people glancing furtively at him, causing rage to explode up in his heart. 7 days, that's definitely his limit, he growled through gritted teeth. Everyone seemed to agree with him. Although no one said so out loud, the consensus was that Meng Hao would last for 7 days. Even the sect leader seemed to hold the same opinion. As for Sha Jiudong, he closed his eyes and stopped watching. Instead, he inwardly pondered whether or not Meng Hao really had a ninth essence. Everyone continued to wait. 10 hours passed, then 16 hours. It didn't take long for 20 hours to go by. By this point, Jin Yunchen couldn't remain seated. He rose to his feet, an expression of disbelief painted on his face. He wasn't the only one. Sha Jiudong opened his eyes again, and the sect leader was staring. All 3 of the Peak 9 Essences cultivators looked on with minds reeling. If they had such a reaction, there was little need to wonder how the others were responding. Looks of astonishment could be seen on all faces. The 7th day is about to pass. Don't tell me he's actually going to last for 8 days. That's impossible. The sect leader only lasted for 7 days, as did fellow Taoists Jin and Sha. People were still discussing the matter when the 24th hour passed by, and the 8th day arrived. As of this moment, Jin Yunchen, the sect leader, Sha Jiudong, and everyone else were completely flabbergasted. 8 days was longer than anyone present had maintained their position on the altar. If Meng Hao had maintained a calm disposition the entire time, it might not have been as shocking. But he had almost woken up in the middle of the process, only to continue onward resolutely. Everyone who was watching felt as if their minds were under attack by shock. Jin Yunchen felt like he had just been slapped in the face again. His eyes went wide as the 8th day began to go by. 6 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours. Soon another 24 hours had passed. Meng Hao had endured for 9 days. Impossible, Jin Yunchen exclaimed. The sect leader's eyes were as wide as saucers, and Jin Yunchen was panting. In the audience, jaws dropped in shock. Meanwhile, inside of Meng Hao, the sealing mark of the 9th hex was once again 99% complete. Vast amounts of immortal qi were streaming out into various parts of his body, connecting them to the sealing mark. As a result, the feeling of an immortal was growing stronger inside of him. It was possible to imagine what would happen if he finally succeeded. When the 9th hex was completed, it could completely reverse Meng Hao's path and change the demon back into the immortal. Meng Hao was so focused on the matter that he could even detect that, as the hex reached a state of completion, his cultivation base was changing. It was transforming back into what it had been in the mountain and sea realm, what he had cultivated all along, the path of immortality. Forming the sealing mark was drawing fully upon Meng Hao's concentration and powers of enlightenment, and he was sure that he hadn't made any mistakes. The aura of a 9th essence also appeared, merging with the other 8 hexes, which made Meng Hao even more certain in his judgment. Without any hesitation, he proceeded to make his attempt at completing that final bit. Rumbling could be heard as the sealing mark of the 9th hex unexpectedly collapsed again. A tremor ran through Meng Hao, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. The same power which had exploded out before once again appeared, except with even more intensity than before. The bronze lamp flickered, and blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth. It took supreme effort, but he managed to force himself to remain in the state of seeking enlightenment. His mind felt as if it were being pounded by thunder, and inwardly he was raging. Something or someone doesn't want me to complete my 9th hex. During this second attempt at finishing the 9th hex, he had been paying very close attention, and was now certain that, in the very moment of completion, certain fluctuations had appeared within him that would be very hard to detect unless you were looking for them. Those fluctuations had interfered with the appearance of the fully formed 9th hex and led to his second failure. Although Meng Hao's eyes were closed, they were completely bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and once again drew upon the power of enlightenment offered by the altar. He fully rotated his cultivation base, and the light of the bronze lamp poured energy out into all parts of his body. It was as if he had become one with the altar itself. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the enlightenment power of the altar exploded out, filling Meng Hao. The aura of transcendence grew stronger, like a tempest that raged around the altar. His repeated attempts resulted from an unwillingness to fail again. However, to everyone else, what was happening was utterly shocking. The crowd outside the altar watched the aura of transcendence grow on Meng Hao, and could sense an intense level of pressure radiating out from him. Everyone began to edge away, even the sect leader. The aura of transcendence and the powerful tempest were things that could shake heaven and earth. Wild colors flashed in the air, and to everyone watching, it almost seemed as if Meng Hao were in the process of transcending. It was a feeling that left their scalps tingling with shock. Impossible, Jin Yunshin murmured, his eyes wide. Shock filled his person as he and everyone else waited another day. The 9th day concluded and the 10th day began. Then, the 11th day and the 12th. 12 days. How inhuman can this 9th paragon be? How could anyone last for 12 days? Just what level is his cultivation base? The peak 9 essences experts only lasted for 7 days, but he actually has lasted for 12 days, and from the look of it, he's going to keep going. Everyone was abuzz, thoroughly shaken by Meng Hao. Of course, however shaken they were, that feeling was not going to be reduced. It was only going to grow more intense. 13 days, 14 days, 15 days. When the 16th day arrived, Meng Hao had surpassed all expectations and pulled off that miracle. He had done something that no one else could even come close to doing, something truly miraculous. Whatever suspicions people had harbored regarding Meng Hao were completely and utterly dispelled. Even the second paragon, who had recently stepped into the peak of the 9 essences level, was so shaken that any desire he had to challenge Meng Hao to a fight were completely gone. Jin Yunshin refused to believe that, after enduring for 16 days, and having begun to emit such a strong aura of transcendence, Meng Hao didn't have a 9th essence. Damn it, he was actually holding back even more than I thought in our fight. He did it all on purpose. He was using me to establish his place, and he let me go so that he would have an excuse to kill me if I ever made another move on him. Having reached this conclusion, Jin Yunshin began to tremble inwardly. Finally, he forced himself to regain his composure. However, he was filled with bitterness and couldn't help but muse about how sinister Meng Hao was. The sect leader's face was unprecedentedly serious. He was completely shaken, even more so than when Meng Hao had been fighting Jin Yunshin. In fact, he was thinking exactly the same thing that Jin Yunshin was. They weren't the only ones. Sha Jiudong had also reached this same conclusion, and his fear of Meng Hao had reached an even higher level than before. Meng Hao had no way of knowing how frightened everyone was because of his actions. He only knew that his third attempt at forming the ninth hex had resulted in yet another failure. However, this failure was met with complete calm. This time, he had not been focused on actually forming the ninth hex, but rather on determining who it was who was trying to stop him. In the moment that the ninth hex collapsed, he was sitting there cross-legged on the altar, and a tremor ran through him. His eyes suddenly opened, and they were completely bloodshot as he looked up into the starry sky of the vast expanse. His expression was one of fury and madness as he said, "So, it turns out it was you all along." Chapter 1444, Swear an Oath. 16 days. The fact that Meng Hao had remained on the Transcendence dais for 16 days left the audience completely and utterly shaken. Jin Yunqian, Sha Jiudong, the sect leader, all of them were completely jarred. Then Meng Hao opened his eyes, radiating the aura of transcendence, and everyone felt their hearts trembling. Those blood-colored eyes contained an unspeakable ferocity, giving them the sensation that they were looking some wild beast from ancient times. Meng Hao had not transcended, and in fact, his ninth hex had collapsed 3 times in a row. However, when the third collapse occurred and Meng Hao opened his eyes, his consciousness left the transcendence dais. At the same time, a powerful air of transcendence filled the area, becoming a raging vortex that spun wildly around him. The vortex rose higher and higher until it seemed to connect to the heavens. It was a completely shocking sight. As the boundless wind screamed, the sect leader's face flickered, and he fell back. Jin Yunqian and Sha Jiudong didn't hesitate to do the same, as did everyone else in the crowd. Even as everyone retreated to a position 30,000 meters away from the altar, they could feel the wild aura raging up from that location. Rumbling echoed out in all directions as the cyclone of wind shot, so high it seemed to slash into the starry sky of the vast expanse itself. In the middle of the cyclone was Meng Hao, who was looking up into the heavens, eyes wide. It was as if he could see through the vast expanse and beyond, as if he were staring at an entity that no one else could see. "It was you," he said, his eyes crimson. He had been puzzled by the first collapse of the ninth hex, he had been shaken by the second, but the third had corroborated his suspicions and provided the answer which he sought. He had confirmed that there really was something surreptitiously interfering with his cultivation. It was like some omnipotent force which was preventing the ninth hex from appearing. Perhaps the more accurate description would be to say that it was not impeding the ninth hex, but rather preventing Meng Hao from transforming from the demon back into the immortal. And the reason for that was, "All heaven fears the immortal," he murmured in a grim voice. Now he understood everything. If he hadn't passed through that tunnel and seen all of the visions regarding all heaven, if he hadn't seen all heaven destroy a world with a single finger, he would never have been able to piece together the true reason why his ninth hex was being interfered with. Because he was now able to determine definitively that the aura of the force preventing the completion of the ninth hex, and the aura he had felt when all heaven destroyed that world in the fresco, were exactly the same. They were exactly the same type of power. In fact, because of the 3 failures of the ninth hex, Meng Hao had discovered something terrifying. Unexpectedly, the power of this so-called all heaven apparently had the same origin as the demon. Instead of saying that all heaven had interfered, leading to the collapse of the ninth hex, it would be more accurate to say that the deed was done by both all heaven and the demonic power inside of him. "All heaven," he murmured. He had many questions regarding all heaven, many misgivings, and no answers. In fact, deep in his heart were many speculations which had arisen because of what he had seen in the fresco visions. Speculations regarding the mountain and sea realm, the immortal god continent, the devil realm continent, and planet vast expanse. Unfortunately, there were no answers to the many questions he had, nor were there even any clues or evidence to analyze. There was even a bit of disbelief within Meng Hao's heart. After all, he was no newcomer to the practice of cultivation. He was well aware that many times, the things you saw with your own eyes weren't even real. But as of now, he was certain about the existence of all heaven. Within the starry sky of the vast expanse, there was definitely some entity with the name, all heaven. Furthermore, there was some connection between this entity called all heaven and himself. At the very least, Meng Hao was certain that there had been something pushing him along in the transformation from immortal into demon. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent as he shot to his feet. In that instant, the sky filled with intense rumbling, and the cyclone began to crumble, as though some incredibly powerful destructive force were descending. The aura of transcendence shattered, and the altar began to shake violently. The intense pressure descending made it seem like the power of the entire starry sky of the vast expanse was crushing down. Everyone from the vast expanse school coughed up blood, even the sect leader, Sha Jiudong and Jin Yunshin. Shocked expressions could be seen on their faces as they fell back even further than 30,000 meters. The entire first land mass seemed to be filled with an intense but soundless screaming, causing everything to shake violently. Meng Hao stood there on the altar facing the intense pressure, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. The pressure was trying to get him to submit. It pushed down on him, causing his legs to tremble as if it were trying to get him to kneel to the heavens. But there was more to it than that. From Meng Hao's perspective, it was as if this pressure were trying to get him to swear an oath that he would never again attempt to transform from the demon into the immortal. His face was extremely grim as the pressure increased. He was shaking visibly, and his bones creaked on the verge of breaking. But then he suddenly threw his head back and laughed uproariously. His eyes glowed bright red as his demonic chi surged. "Threatening me?" he chuckled. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and at the same time his third eye opened. Instantly, the surrounding ghosts became completely visible. Beneath the heavenly pressure, the countless ghosts were trembling. And yet, expressions of insane viciousness could be seen on their faces, unyielding glares of hatred. Even Meng Hao could sense that the aura of the pressure weighing down now was exactly the same as when all heaven had destroyed this world. How could this host of people who had been killed by all heaven not also detect that very same thing? I, Meng Hao, have practiced cultivation free from guilt my entire life. I pursued the Tao of the mountains and seas. Even you, all heaven, do not qualify to levy threats against me. Mad laughter rang out as Meng Hao waved both of his arms out in front of him. When the surrounding ghosts sensed Meng Hao's will and determination, they threw their heads back and let out bitter howls. None of the other cultivators present could see the ghosts, but they could sense the sudden influx of intense coldness they caused. There were so many ghosts it was impossible to tell how many there were, and they were all howling together in one unified voice which rose up into the heavens. They didn't know why they had become ghosts after having been killed by this pressure, nor did they understand why they were more powerful in death than in life. But they did know that, even though they had been unable to fight against this power when they were alive, now that they were dead, they would most definitely fight it. It was impossible to say which ghost did it first, but soon, all of them were flying toward the cultivation-based tempest which swirled around Meng Hao. In the blink of an eye, countless ghosts were flying through the air toward him, causing the tempest to become bigger and stronger. Vast, uncountable numbers of ghosts surged forth, causing the tempest to rapidly expand. 300 meters, 3,000 meters, 30,000 meters, 300,000 meters, 3 million meters, 30 million meters. It spread out seemingly without end, with the altar at its center. Eventually, it covered the entirety of the first land mass, creating an indescribable cyclone. The enormous cyclone swept across the lands, causing mountains to tremble and rivers to seethe. The cultivators from the vast expanse school were there within the raging winds, trembling, looking around in astonishment at what was happening. They were even able to make out faint screams echoing about. "Revenge, revenge. We were killed by all heaven's finger, so in death, we shall exterminate all heaven. The vengeance of the vast expanse continent is like a flame that not even the heavens can extinguish." Countless voices rang out, a cacophony like the voices of an entire world, causing a huge sound wave to surge within the windstorm. Then Meng Hao raised his hands and pointed up toward the heavens. In response, the windstorm, along with the countless howling ghosts, began to rise up into the air. They were like a magnificent army charging toward the heavens, a sight no one would ever be able to forget. The combined forces of an entire landmass, of all the ghosts that existed there, charged up as if to vanquish the vast expanse. Then, as everyone watched, the sky up above was torn apart by the cyclone. The starry sky beyond was revealed in the vast expanse, and yet the windstorm kept rising up. Suddenly, within the shattered dome of the heavens, a figure appeared. He was blurry and impossible to distinguish clearly. Formed from mist, he stood there, looking at the endless army of ghosts, then stretched out a hand in a pushing motion. Something like an invisible barrier apparently existed in front of that figure, and deafening rumbling sounds echoed out as it began to move downward. When the ghosts ran into the invisible barrier, they collapsed into pieces, completely incapable of doing anything against it. The vast disparity of power was like a huge ravine, which there was no hope of crossing. Transcendence, said the astonished sect leader, that's the power of transcendence. Everyone else was equally astonished. Meng Hao might have emitted some of the aura of transcendence, but that had been somewhat of a fluke. This figure and the outstretching of its hand caused the true power of transcendence to appear. Meng Hao stood there on the altar, watching everything play out. Inwardly, he was shaken. He could also sense the power of transcendence, and could tell that the windstorm he had created and the countless ghosts within it could do nothing to stop or even shake this invisible barrier. In the blink of an eye, the barrier destroyed half of the cyclone and continued to grind downward relentlessly. It was now getting closer and closer to Meng Hao. To explain by means of illustration, the power of transcendence compared to the power of a cultivator who had not transcended was like a drop of water compared to fog. No matter how much fog there was, it could do nothing to prevent that drop of water from passing through it. In this case, the windstorm and the ghosts were the fog, and that invisible barrier was the drop of water. Not only did it pass through the fog, it crushed everything and could not be resisted in the slightest. Chapter 1445, One Word. The blurry figure behind the invisible barrier apparently had long hair and was wearing a long robe. However, no facial features were visible except for his eyes. Those eyes were cold and merciless, as if there were no life in them at all, as if they were empty, as if this figure were nothing more than a weapon. A weapon! That was the distinct feeling Meng Hao got after catching sight of the figure behind the invisible barrier. At the same time, the barrier continued to crush down. The cyclone continued to collapse, and the countless ghosts continued to dissipate. The land shook, and crevices opened up. Mountains and rivers rumbled, and everything, even the altar, began to crumble and show signs of complete collapse. The group from the vast expanse school had long since reached a state of utter astonishment. All of them rotated their cultivation bases in an attempt to resist what was happening, but it did little good. In that moment of extreme crisis, the bronze lamp inside of Meng Hao blazed brightly, as though it were building up power which would explode out at any moment. However, before that could happen, all of a sudden, faint fluctuations began to emanate out from the distant ninth land mass, where that huge figure was seated on the enormous throne. They were faint, but even as they appeared, Meng Hao could hear a voice coming from the ninth land mass. It was difficult to hear at first, but it only took a moment for the volume to swell. Eventually, it was possible to make out a word. Apparently it was saying, "B." It was only one word, apparently the word "B," and it almost sounded like a musical note. That one word came out from the ninth land mass, and as it passed along, it caused the eighth land mass to shake, and the light there to grow dim. Even as the eighth land mass was thrown into turmoil, the sound passed into the seventh land mass, then swept across the sixth. The sky trembled and roaring sounds filled the lands. Everything shook in astonishing fashion, and the sound was getting closer and closer to Meng Hao. By the time it reached the fifth land mass, the sound had apparently changed. What Meng Hao now heard sounded more like the word "gone." Gone? In fact, now it almost didn't sound like two words had been spoken. Whistling screams accompanied the arrival of the sounds, and everything trembled. It passed through the fifth land mass, roared across the fourth, then shook the third and the second. By the time it reached the first land mass, the explosive sounds had united. The word was not "be," nor was it "gone." It was one single word. "Begone! Begone! Begone!" The sound echoed about endlessly. It was like an explosion that violently shook the heavens. Apparently, it had always been one word, but had been spoken at such a distance away and traveled so quickly that it had become split apart along the way. But now that it was here in the first land mass, it erupted with incredible power. That was a power which could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Incredible rumbling echoed out across the first land mass. Mountains and rivers were rocked, and a wind of madness swept about. Wild colors flashed about in heaven and earth. It was a single word that was so domineering it caused everything to shake wildly. One word crushed the heavenly might. One word shocked all creation. One word caused the invisible barrier to begin to tremble and then to be riddled with cracks. A moment later, it shattered completely. That same word shook the heavens, causing the blurry figure up above to distort and twist, as though it were being battered by a massive tempest. Then, it faded away. This virtually indescribably shocking scene occurred because of only a single word. A single word uttered by that figure on the enormous throne, one word, completely changed everything. The crushing might of all heaven was dispersed, and the heavens were shattered. It was as if that word had become an enormous hand which swept across heaven and earth, crushing everything that was not of the necropolis. Even the will of all heaven was incapable of staying, and had been driven out. This sight left Meng Hao completely reeling. He turned to look over at the ninth landmass, mind rumbling with shock. However, that voice was something only he could hear. The sect leader and the others couldn't detect it at all. Of course, they were still shaken, although not by the voice itself. They mistakenly believed that everything that was happening was being caused by Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked at the ninth land mass, and was suddenly struck with the deep desire to go there and see for himself this figure was who had just uttered that word. Who was he? The indistinct figure had clearly emanated the power of transcendence, and whose single uttered word seemed filled with virtually infinite power. A person like that must be a transcendent cultivator. Was it Patriarch Vast Expanse? Meng Hao thought, taking a deep breath. That was the only guess he had at the moment. After a long moment passed, Meng Hao swished his sleeve and reined in his cultivation base power. The sky was quiet and the lands went still. A moment ago, a shocking tempest had been raging, but now everything was back to normal, almost as if nothing had happened at all. Meng Hao closed his eyes, and his heart was anything but calm. Far too many shocking events had occurred, and he deeply desired to know who it was that had uttered the word "begone" just now. He wanted to know why all heaven feared the immortal, and he wanted to know what the arrival of the demon meant. What did the demon have to do with all heaven, and why? Did they have similar origins? Even more than all that, he wanted to know why the mountain and sea realm had been fated to be destroyed. Behind the scenes, there was some entity manipulating things, and that entity was none other than all heaven. In any case, the name of all heaven was now deeply burned into Meng Hao's mind. To him, it was a clue. He stood there silently for a moment before opening his eyes. When he did, he saw the cultivators of the Vast Expanse school panting. Because of everything that had occurred, there was no way they could possibly maintain their calm. First was the 16 days he had spent seeking enlightenment, then there was the aura of transcendence shaking the heavens. Then came the heavenly might which had crushed down onto them. All of that left them in complete and utter fear of Meng Hao. It took a moment for Meng Hao to compose himself, but when he did, he turned once again to gaze at the ninth land mass. Then, his third eye slowly closed. When his view returned to normal, he stepped off of the altar. In that moment, the cultivators of the Vast Expanse school looked at him with mixed emotions. After a moment of silence, the sect leader cleared his throat and was just about to say something when, all of a sudden, the entire land mass lurched. Ripples spread out in the heavens, and majestic light began to shine down. That light contained boundless, indescribable heat, which immediately caused the freezing coldness on the first land mass to begin to fade away. However, that was of secondary importance. Most noticeable to Meng Hao and to all of the cultivators from the Vast Expanse school was that grass had sprouted from the ground beneath their feet. In the blink of an eye, everything around them was as green as jade. Off in the distance, the ruins suddenly blurred as time seemed to flow backward, and they began to return to their original state. A city gradually appeared, and there were some areas off in the distance where mountains and rivers could be seen. It wasn't just in their immediate vicinity. The entire first land mass was experiencing a dramatic transformation. This bizarre turn of events caused the sect leader's face to fall. Time is up, we cannot stay here any longer. If we do, we will all die. Meng Hao, even if you can command the ghosts here, you will still perish. Go, all of you, go now. The sect leader transformed into a beam of light that streaked at top speed off into the distance. The other paragons seemed to be aware of what was happening. Faces flickering, all of them took to flight, including Jin Yunshan and Sha Jiudong. Seeing such a reaction from them caused Meng Hao's eyes to flicker. At the same time, he could sense that the flame in the bronze lamp was dying down, and his strange connection to the ghosts was vanishing. Without the slightest hesitation, he flew into the air, joining the group as they sped toward the bridge leading off of the land mass. As they sped along, the sect leader explained matters to Meng Hao. When the necropolis is open, there is a time limit in place. If you can't reach the first land mass within 10 days, then something bizarre will happen in the region outside. Once we almost exceeded that time period and the ruins outside of the land mass returned to their ancient state. There were even living people, but then something strange happened. They all died. At that time, some of our people died there too. The time limit once you reach the first land mass is 1 month. If you don't get to the second land mass by that time, then you must leave the necropolis. Considering the bizarre things that happen outside of the land mass when the time limit is reached, I can only imagine what happens within the land masses. To say that this necropolis is one of the most dangerous places in the entire vast expanse is no exaggeration. It's a restricted area even for people in the 9 essences level. Right now, we have no choice but to leave. We can return in 1 year at the soonest, and then, hopefully, we can reach the second land mass. If we can, then we should be able to stay inside a bit longer. Even as Meng Hao listened to the sect leader's explanation, he could feel his connection to the ghosts fading away. Soon, it was gone altogether, and the bronze lamp had gone almost completely dark. His face flickered as he turned to look behind him. When that happened, his mind spun. He saw that all of the ruins had reverted to their previous state of glory. He saw cities that existed like mirages on the surface of the land. He saw statues suddenly appear, and he saw mountains rise up which had not been there before. Expand. Most astonishing of all was that he could see countless people. Shockingly, there were numerous cultivators, including men and women, old people and young. Apparently, this was just an ordinary day to these people, as they went about the affairs of their daily lives. The sound of tolling bells could be heard, and the buzz of conversation. People gave sermons on the Tao in the mountaintop sects. There were no mortals in this place. The entire landmass was occupied by cultivators. Everyone here practiced cultivation, no matter their position. There was something warm and genial about these people. There was nothing vicious or evil about them, and everyone seemed to be smiling and laughing. Although there might be some level of fighting and scheming, some grudges or conflicts, the overall sensation was that this place was a sublime, flourishing civilization. There was immortal qi, strong and abundant, and Meng Hao was even able to see one area which had been set aside to grow, the most precious of materials. Countless immortal creatures flew about in the sky, and the sounds of happiness filled the air. At one point, an immortal crane flew by Meng Hao, and unexpectedly, it turned its head to look at him curiously. That single glance left his mind reeling. This isn't an illusion. What I'm seeing isn't a hallucination, but real. I'm actually traveling back into ancient times with this land mass. Even as Meng Hao was reeling in shock, the other cultivators were looking around, equally astonished. Everything around them looked beautiful and wonderful, and yet Meng Hao could sense that within the beauty there was immense, deadly danger. Although he wasn't sure what exactly was so dangerous, there was no time to ponder the matter. He took a deep breath and pushed forward even faster, flying past the 8 essences paragons. Everyone was going all out with their cultivation bases, trying to build up as much speed as possible. They proceeded along for an undetermined period of time, and soon, the buildings around them were completely restored. The mountains and rivers, and in fact the entire aura of the land, was that of ancient times. All of the people were completely solid and visible to the eye. It was at this point that Meng Hao and the rest of the group spotted the border of the land mass up ahead, as well as the bridge. Before, that bridge had been made of flesh and blood, but now it was permeated with immortal qi, making it an immortal bridge. There were people on it, chatting and laughing, and when they noticed Meng Hao and the rest of the group, they stopped in place and looked over. One of them was a young man. When he spoke, his voice was clear and filled with dignity. "Excuse me, fellow Taoists, may I ask what has you in such a panic?" His words caused Meng Hao's face to turn grim. Jin Yunshan's pupils constricted, and Sha Jiudong and the sect leader looked on with flickering expressions. Everyone else in the group gasped. Although they were aware that the lands they were in appeared to have returned to ancient times, and had even seen people looking at them as they sped along, they had still harbored hope that maybe it was all just a fluke. But now, with people actually talking to them, they realized that they really were back in ancient times. Ancient times, ancient times. As Meng Hao looked around at everything, something suddenly occurred to him. He remembered a vision he had experienced recently and suddenly began to pant. Then he looked up into the sky and his face fell. "Get out of here immediately," he said loudly. "Do it however you can, otherwise we'll face deadly catastrophe." Even as the words left his mouth, he waved his hand, sucking his 2 8 essences paragon subordinates into his bag of holding. His 2 subordinates had never seen him act this way, and as such, didn't refuse. After they allowed Meng Hao to place them in his bag of holding, he bit his tongue, spitting out a mouthful of blood to unleash an escape magic he had acquired from Shui Dongliu's legacy. His speed increased dramatically, instantly placing him upon the bridge itself. A huge wind blasted out as he sped along. Everyone else in the group was taken aback. Meng Hao's words caused their hearts to begin to thump. There was no need for them to ponder whether he might be deceiving them. The things which were happening around them were simply too strange. They immediately unleashed divine abilities, holding nothing back in their charge toward the bridge. The young man on the bridge frowned, then snorted coldly. He extended both hands and was just about to prepare to block the way, when suddenly a sound like thunder echoed out in the vast blue sky up above. The sound of the thunder instantly caused all of the cultivators' minds to reel and their bodies to involuntarily shiver. It was the same even with Meng Hao. His face fell as all of his doubts were swept away. He was now absolutely certain that this was the day that he had seen in the vision when All Heaven's finger destroyed the world. Only moments ago, he had sensed fluctuations coming from the ninth land mass, which indicated that someone was facing a tribulation. Suddenly, colors flashed in the sky, and the sound of thunder exploded out. Heaven and earth shook violently, and all living beings in the world looked up. The young man on the bridge ignored Meng Hao and the others as he stared up into the sky, shocked. Meng Hao flashed past the young man like lightning, and even as he reached the end of the bridge, an icy coldness began to descend. Without thinking about it, he looked back and saw all of the land masses quaking. Mountains shook and rivers seethed as a gigantic finger began to descend from up above. The finger was so big that it filled the entire sky, and as the living beings of the world looked up, their faces were filled with complete astonishment and disbelief. To Meng Hao, even just looking at the finger caused so much pressure to crush down on him that his head felt stabs of pain, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. This level of power far exceeds what I felt when I faced All Heaven earlier. Based on what I saw in the visions, this time period was when All Heaven was at a peak level of power. He coughed up another mouthful of blood and pushed forward with even greater speed. At the same time that he shot off the bridge, the sect leader, along with Jin Yunqian, the second paragon, Sha Jiudong, and everyone else, stepped onto it. No one spoke. There was no time. They unleashed all the speed they could muster to race across the bridge and toward the exit of the necropolis. Jin Yunqian almost immediately transformed into a golden sun, and a series of after-images could be seen stretching out behind him as his speed increased dramatically. As for Sha Jiudong, his body shrank down, transforming into a stream of sand that merged with the wind and sped along at top speed. The sect leader took a deep breath, then took a step forward. Although that steep seemed to carry him only a few meters ahead, he actually traveled 30,000 meters. It was as if he were transforming an entire swath of land into a tiny stretch of space. Everyone else used different, varied methods to speed through the world toward the exit. It was at this point that, behind them, the heavenly finger which filled the sky began to descend onto the first land mass. That finger was like a world unto itself, moving with such incredible speed that it gave birth to heavenly fire. A sea of flames spread out starting from the fingertip, and as that happened, a howl rose up from far off in the distance. All Heaven, the voice shouted, filled with rage and pain. Even as it echoed out, the finger made contact with the land. The surface of the land shattered. Countless sects were crushed, and countless mountains were reduced to rubble. Cities and statues fell, rivers and vegetation were destroyed. All of the people living on the land were killed in that same moment, unable to struggle or even fight back. Their bodies were instantly transformed into ash. One cultivator after another was incinerated, and in the blink of an eye, the entire first land mass became a place of death. The immortal creatures, the precious materials, everything vanished. The group of people on the bridge, including that young man, were shredded to pieces. Their flesh and blood splashed about, turning the bridge red, filling it with gore. It was as if an invisible shockwave were blasting out, destroying everything that it touched. The shockwave continued out past the borders of the land mass, spreading out into the cities which floated on the outside. They were all transformed into ruins, and everyone who lived there was killed. Meng Hao and the other cultivators from the vast expanse school were all fleeing for their lives. One of the 8 essences paragons was a bit too slow and was overtaken by the shockwave. He began to tremble and was then transformed into ash. When the rest of the group saw this, their minds reeled. Looking back at the incoming shockwave, they pushed more power out of their cultivation bases, even detonating magical items to gain more speed. Meng Hao's face was very grim as he sped along, the fastest of the entire group. As the exit neared, he suddenly heard another shrill cry echoing out from one of the distant land masses. All Heaven, The voice said exactly the same thing it had before, but the tone was different this time. It contained sadness, insanity, and boundless enmity. In that instant, the world was plunged into sinister coldness. Those words filled the entire world with never-ending hatred. Meng Hao didn't look back. He continued onward, a blur as he stepped into the exit. Even as he was about to leave the necropolis, he suddenly sensed some very familiar fluctuations. A tremor ran through him, and he stopped in place, slowly turning his head to look behind him. When that happened, he saw a glittering beam of light shooting out from the ninth land mass toward the enormous finger. Within that beam of light was a copper mirror. Within the mirror was a cold, detached figure, a colorful parrot whose eyes blazed like lightning. It was a majestic sight as the parrot slammed head first into All Heaven's finger. The copper mirror, Meng Hao thought, his mind reeling. Under no circumstances could he ever have imagined that he would see the copper mirror in this place. Chapter 1446, The Aura of the Copper Mirror. Chapter 1447, Yeah, I Am. Meng Hao stood there, one foot in the exit, a gentle force tugging at him as if to pull him out. However, there was absolutely no way he would let his other foot step into the exit. Trembling, he looked back at what was happening in the distant sky. The copper mirror was something that had changed his life. Inside that mirror was the parrot who had become his friend, his comrade. That made him think of the meat jelly. The parrot and the meat jelly were always at each other's throats, but they had long since become like his family. How could he ever forget the meat jelly's talkativeness or the parrot's boasting? How could he forget how they had called themselves Lord Fifth and Lord Third? How could he forget the seafood song? All of those things were there in his mind, to remain there for all time. In the end, in that critical life-or-death moment, the parrot had been willing to erase its mind for Meng Hao, and the meat jelly had sacrificed its undying life force. In the end, one of his friend's consciousnesses was wiped out, and it was taken by those two powerful forces. The other turned into a lifeless husk which was now tucked away deep in Meng Hao's bag of holding. The parrot, Meng Hao murmured. In that moment, Jin Yunqian whistled past him into the exit and then vanished. After him was Sha Jiudong and then the sect leader. All of them were rushing as fast as possible to escape. As they left, they glanced over at Meng Hao and wondered what he was hesitating about. However, there was no time to ponder the matter, and they quickly left. Meng Hao stood there, seemingly oblivious to the cultivators from the vast expanse school. As they flew past him, his eyes were glued on the copper mirror. He saw the copper mirror slam into the finger, which trembled in response. Shockingly, the finger tilted back, and cracks began to spread out over its surface. The finger even began to tremble. A grunt of surprise could be heard, and then the cracked finger flicked the copper mirror. The copper mirror shattered. 9 shards, scattered about in all directions. 8 shards flew out into the starry sky, toward parts unknown. As for the main body of the mirror, it was not shattered, but grew dark and dull as it also flew out into the depths of the starry sky. However, one of the shards of the mirror landed on the third landmass. Meng Hao saw it very clearly, and when he did, he began to shake. He was suddenly filled with the impulse to go to that third landmass and find that mirror shard. He had the feeling that if he could find that shard, then perhaps he could once again sense the copper mirror. Maybe he could sense the parrot. When the mirror shattered, the figure on the ninth land mass shot toward the finger, radiating grief and madness. As for what happened to him, Meng Hao didn't see. He was completely focused on the third land mass. Most of the cultivators from the vast expanse had already escaped. However, there were 2 8 essences paragons still rushing toward the exit. They were only about 30 meters away when they suddenly trembled and transformed into dust. In that exact same moment, the bronze lamp inside of Meng Hao went as dim as if it had been extinguished. Meng Hao could sense that it was a moment of incredible danger and that death was rushing toward him. He knew that he was treading a razor-thin line between life and death, and yet he still chose to open his third eye. Using the third eye, he noted the exact location on the third land mass where the mirror shard had landed and committed it to memory. By that time, death was almost right in front of him, like an invisible mouth preparing to consume him. In that moment, Meng Hao threw his head back and bellowed, stepped fully into the exit and vanished. A moment later, the ripples of death inundated the area where he had been standing. Back on planet Vast Expanse, in the teleportation portal formation on the half-planet, Meng Hao materialized, coughing up a mouthful of blood. His face was pale, and yet his eyes were blazing as if with raging flames. Everyone else looked completely bedraggled. Of the dozens of people who had gone into the necropolis, only 20 came out alive. The rest had perished inside. Meng Hao looked over at the sect leader and asked, "When can we go back in?" "At minimum, 1 year. However, there's no guarantee we can go back that soon. Various preparations must be made, and I also need to personally go ask Immortal Bai Wuchen to come with us. With her and the second paragon, we will have 6 Peak 9 Essences cultivators. With you included, I'm very confident that we can open the passageway to the second landmass." The danger they had just faced did nothing to lessen the sect leader's resolve, and in fact, he was even more convinced than ever that they should go back. With the Transcendence daises, they all had a hope of transcending. Meng Hao stood there silently, then looked down at the teleportation portal upon which he stood. His heart was anything but calm. He had profited to an extreme level in this trip to the necropolis, most importantly, by getting a clue regarding the copper mirror. He was more determined than ever that he had to get back in. If I can find that mirror shard, then perhaps I could restore my connection to the copper mirror. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed with obsession. After a moment passed, he swished his sleeve, sending his 2 8 Essences subordinates flying out, looking completely shaken. Although they had been inside Meng Hao's bag of holding, he had not sealed their ability to sense what was happening in the outside world. When Meng Hao had stopped at the exit, the 2 8 Essences paragons had felt the extreme, deadly danger of the situation. Meng Hao's face was grim as he stepped off of the teleportation portal. He was feeling a bit frustrated, the type that came when keen anticipation filled you, but there was no option other than to wait for what you wanted. As he left the spell formation, Jin Yunchen was there up ahead of him. After returning to the vast expanse school itself, he had breathed a sigh of relief. Back in the necropolis, Meng Hao held the advantage. With countless ghosts at his beck and call, it created a deadly threat that gave Jin Yunchen no choice other than to bow his head. But now that they were back in the sect, although he wouldn't intentionally provoke Meng Hao, he could at least give him a dirty look. It wasn't that he fundamentally had the desire to irritate Meng Hao, especially not with the oaths sworn by the sect leader and Sha Jiudong. However, after suppressing his feelings for so long in the necropolis, now that he was back in the vast expanse school, it was only natural that he would want to let off at least a little bit of steam. Meng Hao's performance on the Transcendence dais had been miraculous, and his battle against the heavenly might astonishing. But Jin Yunchen was convinced that Meng Hao had done all that with the help of the ghosts. Following that line of reasoning, it meant that Meng Hao had never unleashed his 9th essence, and Jin Yunchen simply couldn't believe that he didn't actually have one. In his estimation, Meng Hao was keeping it hidden away as a trump card. Therefore, he had no intention of actually fighting Meng Hao, but had no qualms about giving him a spiteful stare. And thus he did. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed in response. "Get out of my way," he said. Jin Yunchen frowned. They were in a very open area, and although he really was standing in front of Meng Hao, it would be very simple for Meng Hao to simply walk around him. "Trying to start something," Jin Yunchen replied in a grim voice, his eyes turning even icier than before. It was a single sentence and a single cold look. How could Jin Yunchen have ever imagined that in response, Meng Hao's eyes would turn cold and he would say, "Yeah, I am." Even as the words left Meng Hao's mouth, he lunged forward and unleashed a powerful fist strike. That fist strike combined the powers of the life extermination, self-immolation, god-slaying, and devil-butchering fists. Lands shook and mountains were rocked. Colors flashed in the sky. It was a dazzling spectacle. Jin Yunchen's face fell. He had sustained serious injuries in the necropolis and was currently only capable of fighting with 70% of his full power. When he realized that Meng Hao was suddenly attacking him, he quickly performed an incantation gesture to counterattack. A crashing boom echoed out between the two of them. Jin Yunchen fell back, trembling, feeling more insulted than ever. Blood sprayed out of his mouth and his eyes gleamed with madness. The truth of the matter was, he really had no intention of fighting with Meng Hao. In his mind, standing there as he had been was nothing excessive. All he had done was cast a dirty stare in Meng Hao's direction. He hadn't done anything deliberately provocative, only acted a bit cold. Unfortunately for him, he had no idea what kind of a lunatic he had provoked. He had no idea, and in fact no one did. The sect leader was smiling wryly and Sha Jiudong groaned inwardly. The second paragon's eyes went wide. Although he was aware of how overbearing Meng Hao could be, he had never imagined that he would see something like this happening. Clearly, Meng Hao was in a bad mood and needed to vent on someone, and that someone turned out to be Jin Yunchen. Booming sounds rang out. Jin Yunchen felt insulted and enraged. Even as he performed an incantation gesture to unleash a divine ability, Meng Hao transformed into a huge rock. Rumbling sounds could be heard as countless feathers swirled into the air, and at the same time, his hexing magics combined. One boom after another rang out. Jin Yunqian was already injured and had been cowed by Meng Hao in the necropolis. He had no desire whatsoever to fight, and as such, was beaten back no matter what he did. The sect leader shook his head wryly. Finally, he and Sha Jiudong jumped in and separated Meng Hao and Jin Yunqian, who glared angrily at each other as they were pulled back. "You psycho," said Jin Yunqian, almost yelling. He felt more insulted and maligned than ever. "You think you can just go around hitting people because you're in a bad mood? Wasn't our grudge resolved already? I gave you that bracelet of holding." When Meng Hao recalled the matter of the bracelet of holding, his expression softened and he cleared his throat. He wanted to say something but couldn't think of anything appropriate. In the end, it was true. Because of being in a bad mood, he had been looking for trouble. With a cold snort, he turned and flew off toward Ninth Paragon City, where he immediately went into secluded meditation. "Psycho, madman," Jin Yunqian glared at the departing Meng Hao and vowed to himself that he would get revenge somehow. But then he thought about how Meng Hao had lasted for 16 days on the Transcendence dais, and about how vastly separated they were in terms of power. Meng Hao hadn't even used his ninth essence. Most importantly, he was essentially invincible when in the necropolis, and there were surely many more trips to the necropolis coming in the future. Finally, he gave up on the idea of getting revenge. Damn it, I definitely have to make sure not to stand in that psycho's way in the future. Chapter 1448, A Year. It would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a killing horn than to find someone in the vast expanse school who knew about what exactly had happened in the necropolis. The group which went inside sustained serious casualties. Numerous 8 Essences Paragons were killed, and the 6th and 8th Paragons also died. To the vast expanse school, that was a huge loss. However, to the individuals who survived, the benefits were immense. 8 Essences Paragons, 9 Essences Paragons, and even the handful of Peak 9 Essences Paragons all spent time on the Transcendence dais, and gained different levels of enlightenment regarding their future path. Although the paths ahead of them were not clear, their time in the necropolis ensured that the mistiness which covered them was lifted to some degree. Each and every individual believed that if they were given the opportunity to seek further enlightenment, then the impossibility of reaching transcendence might change into a distinct possibility. Although the benefits to the 8 Essences Paragons were not as great as those received by the 9 Essences experts, they were still significant. There were even some who were already gaining an understanding of their 9th essence, and who would surely advance by leaps and bounds. It was possible to say that, although the vast expanse school had experienced significant losses, the benefits to those who had survived were worth it. All of them went into secluded meditation as soon as they returned. Meng Hao sat in his secluded meditation temple, his expression calm. He thought back to everything which had occurred in the necropolis, and his face gradually filled with a cold, unyielding expression. He refused to give in to the idea that he could not form the 9th hex. "All heaven fears the immortal, and his power is of the same origin as my demonic power. This matter is bizarre to say the least." After a moment of silence, his eyes glittered, and he smiled coldly. "I can't use this body of mine to form the 9th hex. If I try, I will fail. The 9th hex would transform me, causing the foundation of the immortal to appear again, and allow me to tread that path once more. The thing is, I don't care whether or not I'm the immortal. I just care about getting stronger. Immortal? Fine. Demon? Great. I don't care as long as I can get that 9th essence, as long as I can extinguish the bronze lamp, as long as I can transcend." His eyes shone with a thoughtful gleam. If he couldn't personally form the 9th hex, then he had to find some way to get someone else to help do it for him. Who would have thought that turning the seal the heavens incantation into the 9th hex would cause immortal transformation? I suppose I could pick something else for the 9th hex. Maybe that would work, he frowned. But that would be such a waste. He sighed, and then suddenly his eyes glittered as a strange idea popped up into his mind. His eyes flickered even more brightly, until he suddenly rose to his feet and began to pace back and forth in the temple. After a moment, he stopped in place. "If this body is not suitable to form the 9th hex, then what if I create a clone without any demonic power? He would have almost no connection to me at all. Perhaps that clone could form the 9th hex. If a demon cannot form the 9th hex, then maybe an immortal can successfully make the seal the heavens hex. If the clone succeeds and my true self merges with the clone, then I will still get the ninth hex in the end. Meng Hao's eyes began to shine brightly. Although it might be a bit difficult, at least I have a direction. The Seal the Heavens hex incites immortal meridians. In that case, if my clone has a pure immortal body, then its chances for success would increase exponentially. The more he thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. This clone's mission will be to finish the ninth hex. His eyes gleamed with determination as he thought back to all of the various cloning magics he possessed. One of them was the true self-Tao, and he also had a magical technique from Shui Dongliu's legacy. However, none of those cloning methods could do the job perfectly. He needed a clone with no demonic power that could gain enlightenment of the ninth hex and that he could then reabsorb. It won't work unless that clone is truly me. Even if my true self dies, the clone can live on. That type of clone would be truly independent and yet would still be something that could merge back with me. With that, he reached up and pressed down onto his forehead. Rumbling filled his mind as suddenly 3 nirvana fruits appeared. As the nirvana fruits hovered in front of him, emitting dazzling light, Meng Hao smiled. 7th year tribulation. If Shui Dongliu could come up with that elaborate plan for the mountains and seas all because of the strange factors within the Fang clan bloodline, then naturally I can do something similar. My clone will be different than any other type of clone, and that is because he will be my 4th life. At this point he closed his eyes, causing their shining brightness to disappear. Back on planet East Victory, his 7th year tribulation had caused him to wither up and in the process produce a nirvana fruit. That had occurred twice. In the 7th year of his 2nd life, he had withered up again, and in the process of beginning his 3rd life, produced a 2nd nirvana fruit. In that 3rd life, his parents had accompanied him to planet South Heaven, where he began his whirlwind of a life that had led up to this very day. Now he wanted to forcibly begin his 4th life. However, he wouldn't do it with his true self, but rather a clone. His 3rd life and his 4th life would both exist simultaneously. It was a situation in which the roots would be the same, but the branches would be different. Fusing would also be no problem, because the bodies would be fundamentally exactly the same. At the same time, his 4th life would be a complete separation from his 3rd life, ensuring that no demonic power existed on the clone. I can use that clone to seek enlightenment of the 9th hex. He took a deep breath and sat down cross-legged. Then, he pushed down on his forehead again. Rumbling sounds began to echo out as he used his nirvana fruits to form the body of his 4th life. The divine ability involved required time. As Meng Hao sat there, eyes closed, life force streamed out of the nirvana fruits and converged upon his forehead, where it gradually began to grow stronger. It was only a bit of life force, like a brewing seed. Time passed. A year went by, during which time the sect leader sent word to Meng Hao that the preparations to go into the necropolis again required an additional, undetermined length of time. Although Meng Hao was anxious to get back into the necropolis, the brewing clone also needed time. Another year passed. Meng Hao's clone was in a constant state of growth and was rapidly reaching the point when it could begin to live his 4th life. There in front of Meng Hao, a blurry figure could be seen. It was impossible to make out the facial features clearly, but its aura was completely different from Meng Hao's. However, Meng Hao could sense that there was some connection between the two of them, a connection that would be extremely difficult to sever. 3 years of refining. This clone will live my 4th life. The root is the same, but the branches are different. He doesn't have an iota of demonic power. Before he turns 7, I will send him into the mortal world to experience life. 7 years later, his memories will awaken. When that happens, I will be him, and he will be me. However, no one else will be able to detect the connection between us, our shared root. At that time, my clone can begin to cultivate the 9th hex. I can't rush things. The 9th hex is critical for me being able to transcend. Meng Hao looked at the blurry figure in front of him, then waved his hand. The figure transformed into a beam of light which flew out at top speed. Flying along with it was a red beam of light which, upon closer examination, could be seen to contain a tiny mastiff. The light flew out of the half-planet's starry sky and onto planet vast expanse itself. Somewhere in the land mass that belonged to Meng Hao, it vanished. He didn't deign to do anything to hide the matter. After all, the only people who could detect it would be the handful of people in the peak of the 9 essences level. None of them who were watching would pay much attention to such a thing. To them, Meng Hao was a lunatic, and lunatics were people to be avoided. That was especially true of this particular lunatic, who was invincible within the necropolis and could not be provoked. Jin Yunqian and Sha Jiudong both felt that way. As for the mysterious immortal Bai Wuqian, she kept herself separate from worldly affairs and had no interest in matters like that. Deep beneath the surface of the half-planet, the sect leader sat on the turtle shell above the sea of flames. A profound gleam appeared in his eyes, the glow of augury. After a moment passed, he slowly lowered his head. What divine ability was that? How come I can't see it clearly? This ninth paragon is wrapped up in too many secrets. Well, those things are all trivial anyway. The sect leader smiled, then closed his eyes. Meng Hao was now more important than ever, considering how things had gone in the necropolis. His battle prowess placed him among the potentates, and the sect leader didn't want to incur his displeasure by being overly curious. In the year that passed, things were quiet in the vast expanse school. Although Meng Hao's subordinates continued to expand his power and influence on the outside, on planet vast expanse itself, everything was peaceful and no major incidents occurred. All of the most powerful experts were in secluded meditation. Something else happened during that year. In the starry sky of the vast expanse, a young man appeared. He wore a green robe and had long white hair, and was accompanied by a gentle-looking woman. They entered the vast expanse from the outside, and came to stop at a location near the immortal god continent. As soon as they entered, the vast expanse began to seethe, and threatening rumbling sounds began to echo out. Some unknown force within the vast expanse immediately began to try to expel the white-haired young man. Apparently, if the man were to attempt to stay here, then the entire vast expanse would spare no effort to eject him with all its might. 1. Yes, the clues so far seemed to point to this guy being Wang Lin. He looked at the immortal god continent, and mixed emotions played out on his face. After a while, he sighed. The woman standing next to him seemed unable to endure the sight and closed her eyes. I severed that finger all those years ago, and starting then it became very difficult to enter this vast expanse. There are so many memories tied up with that land mass. It's a good thing. It's all in the past now. Those people aren't who they used to be anyway. What use is it for them to call to me? The young man sighed. Severing that finger evoked such hatred against me, bone-deep hatred. As for the fellow Taoist still wrapped up with that same hatred, once he transcends, he'll understand everything. The white-haired young man turned. Along with the woman, he left the vast expanse, after which the expelling force which had risen up slowly faded away. Another thing happened in that year. Outside of planet vast expanse was a cultivator clan which was said to have existed since ancient times. The person who had led them in their recent comeback was a female chosen, and during that year she joined the vast expanse school. After being accepted into the sect leader's division, the sect leader himself appeared, which was rare. Looking at her surname, he asked her what her given name was. The woman smiled and replied, "Bei, disciple Han Bei at your service." The final event which occurred during that year occurred on the border of the ninth land mass of planet vast expanse. There, a small forested mountain could be seen, beneath which flowed a river. A middle-aged scholar was sitting next to that river, reading a book. Suddenly, he looked up and saw a sleeping baby floating along above the surface of the river. The baby had a wooden tablet lying on his chest with a name written on it, Fang Mu. Within the baby's hand was a fruit that seemed to be made of gold or jade, and yet wasn't. An aura like that of reincarnation could be detected, as well as the Tao of Nirvana. Next to the baby was a little dog, which was happily licking the baby's cheek. The water parted for the baby, and fish leaped up excitedly. The sunlight didn't dare to strike the baby too harshly, and the countless beasts which peeked out from within the trees of the forest wouldn't harm a hair on his head. Chapter 1449, Heiaui. On the border of the ninth continent of planet vast expanse was a river which snaked back and forth to parts unknown, dotted on either side by little villages. One of them was called Peach Blossom Village. A few hundred people lived in the village, and generally speaking, they all got along well with each other. Supposedly, they descended from a group that migrated to this location from one of the great clans many years in the past. Exactly what happened along the way was unknown, but years later, Peach Blossom Village came to be. Most of the people who lived there made a living by hunting or fishing. In the morning, smoke would curl up from kitchen chimneys, and at night, the stars twinkled in the sky. It was a peaceful and auspicious place. Occasionally, though, a commotion would break out, and one might even hear shouts of rage. "Fang Mu, Heiaui, when I get my hands on you, I'm gonna spank that little butt of yours." 1. In Chinese, the nickname I translate as Heiaui is based on the Hao character in his name. The nickname itself rhymes with a Chinese word that means mouse. In this chapter, the actual word for mouse is used as the nickname, although it would sound exactly the same as Meng Hao's nickname, so I decided to keep Heiaoi. I don't care what you say, I've had enough. Stop right there, Fang Mu. If you try to run, I'll just have to go have a word or two with that drunkard father of yours. That's my rooster, why you? You can't take my rooster. On one particular morning, as smoke rose from the chimneys, cries like this echoed out in the village. The voices belonged to the elderly, the village grown-ups, and even children. Meanwhile, a 6-year-old boy was hiding in the bushes in a far corner of the village, looking very pleased with himself. He was handsome, with eyes that glittered like stars and skin as smooth as jade. He wore rough hemp garments and even had some mud smudged on his face, but that couldn't conceal the clever, intelligent gleam in his eyes. His hand was clasped around the throat of a chicken. At first glance, the chicken appeared to be struggling, but closer examination revealed that it was trembling. It trembled, not because of the boy, but because of the hunting dog that was stretched out on the ground off to the side. The dog lay there lazily, and yet it emanated an invisible pressure. Whenever the chicken started to struggle, the dog would growl, and the chicken would instantly sag listlessly in fright. Some time passed, and the village eventually quieted down. The boy licked his lips, then slowly began to tiptoe his way back through the village, chicken in hand. The hunting dog followed along, also licking its lips. "This isn't for you," the boy whispered, "so don't even think about it. This is my tuition." He threaded his way through the village until he found himself in front of a somewhat dilapidated house, whereupon he gave the gate an urgent kick. "Master," he whispered, "open up, hurry." The gate opened, revealing a slovenly old man. He reached out, dragged the boy inside, then looked around to see if anyone had noticed before closing the gate. As soon as he was inside the courtyard, the boy spoke in a loud voice. "Master, you old fogey, I brought this rooster as my tuition. I want to study immortal magic." The old man wasn't very tall and had a hunched back. He turned and looked at the boy with narrowed eyes, then looked at the chicken and began to salivate. "Excellent, excellent," he said, sounding very serious. "Ah, you know how to bring gifts to your master, kid. You really have potential. All right, fine. After I deal with this evil creature, I'll teach you some immortal magic. You just wait here for a bit while I convert the wicked, shameless beast." With that, he grabbed the chicken and took a few steps toward the house. "Master, how are you going to convert it?" asked the boy, eyes wide with curiosity. "No peeking," the old man said sternly. "Master is going to be using some magic, so you'll probably smell something strange. There's not much spiritual energy in this remote place, plus I'm injured, so I'm counting on you to act as Dharma protector. Heiaoi, I'm placing my life in your hands. You must do a good job as Dharma protector." The young boy nodded excitedly in response. The old man entered the house, and a few moments later a miserable squawk could be heard. Then came the sound of feathers being plucked and the hiss of boiling water. Before long, a fragrant aroma drifted out. The boy was very curious, and after a bit of time couldn't help but ask, "Master, since this evil creature is a monster, why is it so weak? I caught it almost without even trying." "That's because Master used some magic earlier to drain its power." By this point, it sounded like someone was eating a meal inside the house. "Master, I've helped you catch a lot of monsters throughout the years. In fact, the village is almost completely cleared out of the things. That's why my dad spanks me all the time. When are we going to leave the village to kill some monsters and fiends?" "Oh, there's no hurry. Yesterday, I noticed a mutt in the yard of old Zhu's house on the west side of the village. You should bring that dog over to me for inspection. It's also an evil creature." The sounds of ravenous devouring could now be heard in the courtyard. The boy looked quietly up into the sky. "Master, my dad's temper is really bad. A few days ago when he was spanking me, he said I was the reason he failed in the imperial examinations. Oh, another thing, he said I got picked up out of the river, right? I've been having a lot of dreams lately. I dream about weird people and strange things. I even see people flying around. Something about all of it seems really familiar. It's almost like someone is calling out to me as if there are two me's." The boy seemed to have difficulty expressing what exactly he wanted to say, and the more he talked, the more confused he seemed. At some point, the slovenly old man had emerged from his house and was now standing in front of the boy, looking at him. "Don't let your imagination run too wild," he said, yawning. "Two U's. You're talking about a clone, and only very powerful people can have clones. Yes, powerful people like your master. Tell me, based on your feeling, where is this other version of you?" "There," said the boy, rising to his feet and pointing off in a certain direction, a blank look on his face. "There, very, very far away. I dreamed about a huge temple and lots of mountains." "Ha ha ha, Master knows exactly what place you're talking about. That's the ninth sect, the vast expanse school's ninth sect. Now that I think about it, the ninth sect has been recruiting disciples in this area recently. If you serve Master well, I might be able to recommend you." The old man chuckled. Seeing the blank look on the boy's face, he reached out and tousled his hair. "All right, fine. You've always loved to let your imagination run wild. Poor kid. Okay, I'm going to teach you some amazing immortal magic today. It's a natural heavenly Tao, something heaven-shaking and earth-shattering, something that ghosts and gods alike revere. We're talking about the essence of life here, the origin of all magics, the Tao of all Taos." The boy's previous confusion was gone, and now he seemed excited. "Let's go," said the old man, looking up at the evening sky. He led the way out of the courtyard and then down a little path behind the house. The boy followed along, as did the lazy dog. They walked along for a while until it was dark, whereupon they reached the back courtyard of a certain house. The old man looked this way and that, then leaped over the wall and into the courtyard with the boy. Then he whispered, "You're definitely not allowed to see what will happen in a moment. Just listen. There's going to be a sermon on the Tao, understand? Master is going to be doing some cultivating. You just stand there and watch me as you stand watch as Dharma protector." The boy's heart began to pound and he nodded eagerly. Looking pleased, the old man walked over and entered the house. Moments later, the boy heard the voice of a woman. "What took you so long, you old bastard?" "I'm here now, heh heh. All right, let's hurry things up. I'm going to perform some magic for you." Soon, some very strange noises could be heard coming from inside the house. The boy's eyes went wide. He didn't quite understand what was happening, but he suddenly remembered that Widow Lee often had male visitors coming and going, bringing her various gifts. "So it turns out Widow Lee is a cultivator," he murmured. He was so engrossed in listening to what was happening that he didn't notice something behind him. At some point, a blurry figure had appeared. Of course, even if the boy hadn't been so engrossed, he probably still wouldn't have noticed. It was a young man wearing a green robe. He looked like a scholar, except his expression was cold. He appeared on the scene without making the slightest sound, although his arrival caused the starlight to distort somewhat. The hunting dog shivered, and a warm look appeared in its eyes. "Seventh-year tribulation. Tonight my clone's seventh-year tribulation will come. After the tribulation, his memories will eventually return. Then he will be me, and I will be him." That young man was none other than Meng Hao, and this boy was the clone he had sent into the mortal world to live his fourth life. He was also the clone who would seek enlightenment of the ninth hex. "It should be coming any time now," Meng Hao said softly. In almost the exact same instant that the words left his mouth, a tremor ran through the boy, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. He let out a sudden cry as his body began to wither. The sudden cry startled the old man and also rang out through the quiet night to be heard by other villagers. The old man rushed out of the house, and when he saw the boy, a look of sincere concern appeared on his face. The truth was that he really did care for the child, and because of that he quickly ran over and pushed his hand down onto his forehead. Nothing happened. The old man's face fell. He knew that some vile ailments were best treated by medicinal plant concoctions prepared by doctors, so he scooped the boy up in his arms and raced through the village toward the doctor's house. It was a sleepless night for most of the villagers in Peach Blossom Village. At some point, dark, churning clouds had filled the sky, though no rain fell. Thunder boomed and gradually a mist built up. Strangely, the mist was violet-colored and roiled as if countless terrifying entities existed inside of it whose roars echoed out into the night. The little boy who had somehow come to be known as Heiaui lay trembling in the courtyard of the doctor's house. Many villagers were present, including the slovenly old man. There was also a middle-aged scholar who, despite wearing his scholar's robe, had a stubbly beard and held a flagon of alcohol in his hand. His eyes were blank and unfocused. This was the boy's father. Years ago, he hadn't been like this. However, after failing the imperial examinations, he had abandoned himself to despair. He was as drunk as usual and had been physically dragged over to the doctor's house by one of the other villagers. "I can't save him," the doctor said, sighing. When the middle-aged scholar heard that, he looked over at the boy he had picked up out of the river, who was now withered and gaunt. The scholar shivered, then raised his alcohol flagon and took a long swig. "He's better off dead," he murmured, sounding pained. The other villagers in the courtyard sighed sadly. Although the boy was often a bit naughty, to see him die of illness like this was very distressing. Meng Hao currently hovered up above, looking down silently at the events playing out. Just when he was about to reach out his hand, though, something happened. Who said he's better off dead? Hey, Aoi's not going to die. The old man strode forward, eyes bloodshot as he once again took the boy into his arms. He's not going to die, you hear me? He yelled. He's just sick, right? You people can't save him, and his dad doesn't care, but I'm his master and I care. With that, the old man carried the boy away. Everyone was shocked and instantly devolved into a hubbub of voices. Suddenly, people saw the old man erratically flying up into the air, which caused the entire village to break out into an even bigger commotion. Meng Hao hovered there, watching thoughtfully. Gradually, he faded away. He could sense that his clone was gradually awakening and that soon there would truly be two versions of himself. Chapter 1450, Joining the Sect. Maybe mortals can't save him, said the old man through gritted teeth as he floated up into the air, but cultivators can. His cultivation base wasn't very high, and he had been seriously injured years ago. His longevity was nearing its end, and therefore flight was only possible for him by burning some of his life force quintessence. Even that wasn't something he could do for extended periods of time. He had once thought that he would simply grow old and die in Peach Blossom Village. He had never imagined that he would encounter this young boy who he now held in his arms. In fact, it wasn't really the scholar who had raised the boy. It was this old man who had guided him through his young life. It's just some illness, right? The old man growled. Soon, he had flown to the peak of a nearby mountain. There, he very gingerly pulled a jade slip out of his garment, an old jade slip that was worn and almost broken. After pulling it out, he looked down at it with a bit of hesitation. This was the most precious item he possessed, and even he wasn't sure where it came from. However, he was certain that the divine ability it contained was unique and profound. Sadly, his latent talent was only average, and he had never been able to cultivate it successfully. However, he distinctly remembered how, back in the days when he had come to acquire it, numerous cultivators had been fighting over it, all of whom had seemed very powerful to him. Gritting his teeth, he cast aside all hesitation and pushed his finger down onto the surface of the jade slip. Instantly, he seemed to age even more, and yet, a seal opened on the jade slip. A majestic beam of light shot up into the sky that was visible even from a vast distance away. Obviously, the old man had unsealed the jade slip in order to attract the attention of nearby cultivators, and was planning to offer the slip itself as payment for them to save the young boy. The old man didn't bother to ponder whether or not this course of action could potentially be dangerous. In his mind, any danger was worth braving when compared to the hope it offered. After all, he clearly remembered seeing some disciples from the vast expanse school flying about recently, and after a bit of calculation, was certain it was recruitment season on the vast expanse school's 9th continent. In the past, the vast expanse school had very strict requirements for new disciples, but in recent years the 9th sect had been expanding. Cultivators from the 9th sect had been combing the continent looking for children with exceptional latent talent, and taking them back to the sect to begin practicing cultivation. The light hadn't been shining from the jade slip for very long before a few beams of light could be seen shooting through the air toward it. 3 people became visible, all of them middle-aged men. They had extraordinary cultivation bases, and after they landed and saw the jade slip, their expressions flickered. The slovenly old man immediately clasped hands and bowed deeply. May I ask if you are fellow Taoists from the vast expanse school? I am Sun Dali, a humble rogue cultivator. Today, I would like to offer this treasure in exchange for help from you fellow Taoists. Please save this young boy's life. The 3 cultivators looked at the boy, and then the leader of the small group made a grasping motion, causing the jade slip to fly over into his hand. After examining it for a moment, a smile broke out on his face. So this jade slip contains a legacy. Laughing heartily, he waved his sleeve, sending a stream of spiritual energy into the boy. Then, without another look, he turned and prepared to leave, as did his 2 companions who looked just as delighted as him. The slovenly old man was getting very nervous. The boy was still in a withered state and didn't really look much better than before. The old man suddenly blurted, "Fellow Taoists, this boy has uncharacteristically rare latent talent. He has an enlightened soul, spirit bones, and spirit-attuned blood vessels." The 3 cultivators stopped in their tracks. The man with the jade slip frowned. Their mission was to find disciples with exceptional latent talent, and the bizarre transformations of heaven and earth which had struck the nearby village was why they had come to this location in the first place. That was also why they had shown up so quickly in response to the light from the jade slip. After hearing the old man's words, The cultivator who had taken the jade slip walked over to the boy's side and placed his hand onto his forehead. After a thorough examination, the man began to tremble. "Junior brothers, you take a look too." With that, the two other cultivators came over to inspect the boy. After they did, they seemed equally moved. "That's superlative latent talent. He really does have spirit bones, an enlightened soul, and naturally occurring spirit-refined blood. Of all the fledglings we've found recently, he's the best by far." The three cultivators' eyes burned with fervor. Because of the recent expansion of the ninth sect, more disciples were being recruited than ever. As for these three cultivators, if they found children in the mortal world who had exceptional latent talent, and then brought them back to the sect, they would receive handsome rewards in the form of cultivation resources. The three immediately looked over at the slovenly old man and began to ask questions. "What's this kid's name?" said one of them. "Fang Mu," replied the old man. "Are you a relative of his? He's sick, and we need to take him back to the sect to be treated. Afterward we wish for him to become a disciple of the vast expanse school." The old man immediately nodded in assent. As far as he was concerned, Haoi's only chance at survival was to go to the vast expanse school, which was one of the sects that he believed to be trustworthy. The three cultivators didn't say anything more. They picked the boy up, then transformed into beams of light that shot off into the distance. Soon, they reached a wide plain, in the middle of which was a teleportation portal. As was the norm, the teleportation portal was protected by a shield that would prevent anyone except cultivators of the vast expanse school from entering it. The three stepped onto the teleportation portal, and moments later, glittering light rose up as they and the boy were teleported away. Off in the distance, the slovenly old man could just barely see the light of teleportation, and he sighed. Although he didn't wish to part with the boy, an expression of anticipation could still be seen in his eyes. He had known almost from the beginning that the boy named Fang Mu had incredible latent talent, talent that could shake heaven and earth. His original plan had been to wait for a few more years, then take the boy out into the world. He would call upon some of his old acquaintances in the cultivation world to get the boy a spot in a sect, and thus start him on his path of cultivation. Even though the events of the day were somewhat coincidental, as far as the old man was concerned, Fang Mu being able to join the vast expanse school was a stroke of luck. Eventually, the old man sighed and headed back to the village. As the moon shone down from above, the old man looked even older than before, and a bit more lonely. The truth was that even if the old man hadn't brought the boy to the top of that mountain, the three cultivators from the vast expanse school would still have come. The transformations to heaven and earth that had occurred in the village had attracted them, and either way, they would have seen how special the boy was and taken him to their sect. All of that had long since been arranged by Meng Hao. It was the most convenient way to arrange for his clone to seek enlightenment of the ninth hex. Meanwhile, a teleportation portal began to shine somewhere in the ninth sect. The three middle-aged cultivators appeared, carrying Meng Hao's clone. After stepping off of the teleportation portal, they headed toward the main temple of the sect. Before long, rumbling sounds echoed out in the sect as several beams of light shot toward the temple. That attracted the attention of a lot of nearby disciples, who looked over in curiosity to see what was happening. Inside the temple, several old men had just sat down cross-legged around Meng Hao's clone. All of them were pouring cultivation-based power into his body, which was gradually recovering from its withered state. He really does have superlative latent talent. In all my years, I've never seen anyone who actually has real superlative latent talent. He even has spirit bones, an enlightened soul, and spirit-attuned blood vessels. He's not a child, he's a precious bodily treasure. I've never seen or even heard of anything like it. If this kid practices cultivation, he'll definitely make rapid progress. The entire group was abuzz with conversation. Any other type of latent talent would not have provoked such a reaction, but he had superlative latent talent, along with spirit bones, an enlightened soul, and spirit-attuned blood vessels. This clone of Meng Hao's was like a rare gem. Soon, Meng Hao's clone was no longer withered, which the old men believed to be due to their treatment. However, he looked even thinner and weaker than he had before, and was apparently now in a very deep sleep. Take him to one of the side chambers and have someone look after him. When he wakes up, arrange for him to formally join the sect. The old men were all exhausted from their efforts. After making the necessary arrangements, they looked at Meng Hao's clone, excitement glittering in their eyes. Finally, they returned to their own residences to start the breathing exercises necessary to restore their cultivation bases. A few days later, Meng Hao's clone opened his eyes. At first he looked confused, but then his vision focused, and his eyes began to radiate bright, cold light. It was very strange to see a look like that in the eyes of a young boy. Soon the coldness faded away, and his eyes returned to normal. "I'm awake," he murmured. He felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. He could even sense his true self, deep beneath the surface of the main planet, on that half-planet, sitting there cross-legged in the ninth paragon's secluded meditation facilities. As of this moment, Meng Hao's true self finally breathed a sigh of relief. At long last he could focus fully on seeking enlightenment of his 8 essences. This clone will live my 4th life. His only mission is to successfully form the 9th hex. As for his cultivation, well, I created the clone's body after carefully observing my own body, which was remolded by the bronze lamp. In all of planet vast expanse, and in fact, in all of the vast expanse itself, it would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a killing horn than it would be to find someone whose latent talent exceeds this clone's. Since that's the case, he can elevate his cultivation base much more quickly than normal, rise to prominence in the 9th sect, reach the pinnacle step by step. It shouldn't be difficult. With no demonic power, his body is pure in every sense of the word. A satisfied gleam appeared in Meng Hao's eyes. Several days later, Meng Hao became a disciple of the vast expanse school. His latent talent shook the entire 9th sect, and when the Tao Realm Patriarch heard of the matter and investigated it personally, he dispatched people to Peach Blossom Village to make further inquiries and make sure nothing was amiss. Meng Hao was then sent to one of the 9th sect's numerous subdivisions, where he became an inner sect disciple. This year was 10th, in which Meng Hao's true self was the 9th paragon. This year, a disciple by the name of Han Bei became one of the sect's holy daughter designates. This year, Meng Hao's clone Fang Mu became the inner sect disciple, one of the subdivisions of the 9th sect. Neither the slovenly old man, nor the 3 cultivators who had brought the clone back to the sect, nor the old men who had treated his condition, nor anyone in all of planet vast expanse, could ever have imagined what a dazzling flower this Fang Mu would bloom into. Only Meng Hao's true self knew. He might shrivel away into nothing, or perhaps he would blossom a bloody scarlet color. Note from Deathblade. In this and subsequent chapters, Urgen often refers to the clone as simply Meng Hao. In some situations I've changed it to either Fang Mu or Meng Hao's clone to avoid confusion, but for the most part I'm keeping things as is. It really serves to emphasize that they are essentially the same person in 2 different bodies. /expand. The techniques of the vast expanse school were many and varied, and could be said to be all-encompassing. However, in terms of fundamentals, they were different than the magical techniques of the mountain and sea realm. Instead of being driven by the energy of heaven and earth, they were driven by the energy of the vast expanse. Cultivation in the vast expanse involved breathing techniques to absorb its energy, and resulted in forming a unique great Tao. After he became an inner sect disciple, Meng Hao's 7-year-old clone resided in a special residence set aside for him by the sect. He rarely left his home, and as such, didn't know much about the outside world. But that changed after a year passed. After only 1 year of practicing cultivation, tribulation lightning descended on Meng Hao's residence. It destroyed the house and shattered the courtyard, and caused widespread shock among the surrounding disciples of the 9th sect. Even some of the old-timers were astonished by the 9 successive bolts of lightning which fell from the sky. Afterward, a young boy emerged from the wreckage of the courtyard residence. Shockingly, he was accompanied by the aura of Foundation Establishment. Foundation Establishment in and of itself wasn't anything spectacular. However, the tribulation lightning was a bit of a surprise, and then some of the disciples realized that it was Meng Hao who had appeared from within it. If I remember correctly, he joined the sect last year as a mortal. How is that even possible? 1 year, he reached Foundation Establishment that quickly. What's his name again? Oh right, Fang Mu. His name is Fang Mu. Meng Hao's clone Fang Mu experienced 9 bolts of tribulation lightning and reached Foundation Establishment. The news caused a small-scale stir, but the sect as a whole was huge, and Meng Hao was merely an inner sect disciple in one of many subdivisions. Normally speaking, it was a matter that would quickly become forgotten. Meng Hao might have extraordinary latent talent and might have reached Foundation Establishment in only a year, but Foundation Establishment didn't count for much in the 9th sect as a whole. The number of Foundation establishment cultivators in the sect was impossible to even count. Even within that subdivision, they were as numerous as the hairs on an ox. But something happened a year later in the same residence. Tribulation lightning struck again, but this time in greater number. 99 bolts of lightning fell onto the residence. Rumbling echoed out, and the residence and courtyard were destroyed. When Meng Hao emerged, he no longer emitted the aura of Foundation establishment, but rather core formation. The entire subdivision was thrown into a commotion that far exceeded that of the previous year. Countless people were completely shocked, even the elders. The subdivision head personally came to investigate and was astonished. There were still plenty of people who were more powerful than him, but what was most shocking was the speed of his progress. To many people, such a thing was almost impossible to believe. Foundation establishment in 1 year, then core formation in another year. Don't tell me he's going to reach nascent soul in a year too. What type of latent talent does he have? By now, more and more people were talking about this Fang Mu. In fact, word was spreading outside his subdivision and into other subdivisions. Then, the 3rd year passed. 999 bolts of tribulation lightning descended, and Meng Hao reached nascent soul. In the 5th year, he reached spirit severing, and 9,999 lightning bolts fell. All subdivisions of the 9th sect were completely shaken. The rainstorm-like hail of tribulation lightning shook the whole 9th sect, and Fang Mu's name was the subject of countless conversations. In the 7th year, his moment of reaching Tao seeking was a grand occasion for vast numbers of cultivators in the 9th sect. Numerous cultivators watched as a tempest of tribulation lightning bolts descended, only one lightning bolt short of 100,000. It was a power of tribulation that very few Tao-seeking cultivators could fight back against. It was as if heaven and earth, as if the vast expanse, were trying to completely wipe Meng Hao's clone out of existence. However, as the lightning fell onto the clone, his eyes shone brightly. It was as if he was directly opposing the vast expanse. The lightning fell for 10 days, after which Meng Hao's clone was in Tao seeking. Time flew, the 10th year arrived. 10 years ago, Meng Hao's clone had been nothing more than a weak child. But now, 10 years later, he was a handsome and extraordinary young man. He stood tall and straight atop one of the mountains in the 9th sect, looking up into the sky, which rumbled as tribulation lightning began to build up. It was immortal tribulation. In 10 short years, Meng Hao's clone had created a legend on planet Vast Expanse, even a myth. In 10 years, he went from being a mortal to reaching Foundation establishment, core formation, nascent soul, spirit severing, Tao seeking, and immortal ascension. That was a process that some people never completed within their whole lifetime, and yet Meng Hao's clone did it in 10 years. The entire 9th sect was shaken, as was the Vast Expanse school as a whole. Even paragons got wind of it. The immortal tribulation was even more stunning than the tribulations from before it. 1 million lightning bolts descended onto the 9th continent, causing all the lands to shake. People flew up into the air from all the other sects that were part of the Vast Expanse school, all to watch the immortal tribulation. The 9th sect was very excited, and even sent someone out to act as Dharma protector for their number 1 chosen. That person was a Tao sovereign, a woman of extraordinary beauty. She sat on the 9th sect's Tao mountain, looking up into the sky with a look of surprise. This is a mere immortal tribulation, and yet the Vast Expanse sends tribulation lightning like this. It's almost as if there's a heavenly Tao or a magical law of nature intent on preventing lightning that exceeds his cultivation base from descending. Were it not for that, the Vast Expanse would wipe him out in body and mind. The Tao sovereign found it very strange, especially when she realized that she could sense fluctuations of fear. Fear, she thought, shaking her head and wondering if she was mistaken. The Vast Expanse is boundless and majestic. Even if it really does have a will of its own, how could it fear a trifling immortal realm cultivator? 1. Since I'm sure some people are wondering, there are plenty of different words for fear, fright, being scared, terrified, etc. in Chinese. Here, the word is indeed the same word for fear, as in, all heaven fears the immortal, which is a word that isn't used very often in the story. The immortal tribulation lasted for 3 whole months before it faded away. During that entire time, Meng Hao's clone proudly closed his eyes and allowed himself to be bathed by the tribulation lightning. He didn't fight back or resist it. He allowed the lightning to strike him. It was like a baptism in which he didn't move an inch. That, of course, led to widespread shock. When the last bit of the immortal tribulation was about to fade away, Meng Hao's eyes suddenly opened, and he reached out, pointing his finger up at the heavens. He did not speak, but the gesture of pointing his finger caused colors to flash and a gale-force wind to scream. The entire sky seemed to tremble, and countless tribulation lightning bolts shattered, transforming into motes of light that drifted out. At this point, the immortal tribulation ended, and Meng Hao's clone began to emanate immortal qi. But then the sky shook, and a red bolt of lightning suddenly formed, shooting down toward Feng Mu. It was backed by a shocking will, and unexpectedly radiated the might of the Dao realm. Even as the red bolt of lightning descended, a red cloud appeared up above, and red rain began to fall. It was a sight shocking to all, that caused even the female Dao sovereign's face to fall. The blood of the heavens. That means, the Tao of the vast expanse society is violating its own magical laws, paying the highest price to eliminate this young man by sending tribulation lightning against him that exceeds the immortal realm. The Tao sovereign was just about to do something when, all of a sudden, the red bolt of lightning lurched to a halt about 300 meters away from Feng Mu's head. There it remained in midair, completely unmoving. An incredible pressure suddenly filled the entire continent. At some point, a person had appeared in the air. It was a young man wearing a black robe with long violet hair. As he floated there, he radiated a supremely domineering aura, as if he were the most important entity in existence. Boundless coldness rolled off of him, and a red, demonic glow could be seen in his eyes. On his forehead was a long violet mark that was apparently a closed third eye. "Ninth Paragon," blurted the female Dao sovereign. Trembling, she dropped to her knees to kowtow. In that same moment, countless cultivators in the vast area that made up the ninth sect, regardless of the levels of their cultivation base, dropped trembling to the ground. "We offer respectful greetings, Ninth Paragon. We offer respectful greetings, Ninth Paragon." The sounds echoed out, causing everything to shake. To the cultivators in the ninth sect, the ninth Paragon was their lord, their spirit, and their leader, the most ultimate of monarchs. This was none other than Meng Hao's true self. As soon as he realized that there was something out of the ordinary with this bolt of tribulation lightning, he came as his true self. As soon as he appeared, he reached out and grabbed the bolt of red lightning, then crushed it in his hand. A boom rang out as the lightning bolt shattered. The cloud layers up above roiled, and a faint roar of rage could be heard. Meng Hao's true self looked up into the sky, eyes glowing red. "Scram," he said, flicking his sleeve. Then a massive blast of energy exploded out as he flew up toward the clouds. At the same time, his clone stood on the mountain, looking up into the sky, his eyes glowing without the slightest hint of red. They only contained pure, immortal light. The heavens trembled and the clouds ceased to seethe. In fact, they collapsed, and their redness faded away. The sky went dark, and outside of planet vast expanse, boundless ripples spread out into the vast expanse for a long moment before everything finally went still. Having accomplished these things, he prepared to vanish. But then, he looked out into the void and saw something far off in the distance that made him stop. His glance caused the void to vibrate, as if someone were out there, reeling in shock. Suddenly, Hanbei stumbled out into the open, mixed emotions on her face, including shock as she looked at Meng Hao's true self and his clone. A tremor ran through her, and without the slightest hesitation, she began to back up. However, even as she did, Meng Hao reached out and made a grasping motion. The entire world seemed to freeze in place as a tremendous power rumbled out. Even as that power was about to sweep over Hanbei, fluctuations suddenly began to emanate out from her that Meng Hao recognized. It was the aura of all heaven, the aura of a demon. Chapter 1451, Hanbei's Secret. Chapter 1452, Leverage. The aura was obscure. In the moment that it exploded out, it transformed into a teleportation power which whisked Hanbei away, right out from Meng Hao's grasp. When she reappeared, she was back in the first sect of the vast expanse school, in her secluded meditation facilities. Blood immediately began to ooze out of her mouth, but it was without the slightest hesitation that she produced an ancient feng shui compass from her bag of holding, which she then placed onto the ground in front of her. Ripples immediately began to spread out, filling the area and protecting her within their range. Hanbei was shivering, her breath coming in rapid pants, her face covered with a look of disbelief. Her mind had been thrown into chaos thanks to Meng Hao's sudden appearance. Earlier, she had felt the tug of memory after hearing the name Feng Mu, which was why she had gone to take a look. How could she ever have imagined what would result? Meng Hao, Feng Mu. She took a deep breath, performing a double-handed incantation gesture to strengthen the power of the Feng Shui compass. Backslash. The way Han Bei had suddenly escaped was strange to say the least, and in fact, other than Meng Hao, no one on planet Vast Expanse even noticed her. Meng Hao's true self looked at the spot where she had disappeared, eyes glittering. Han Bei, I can't believe she's here. He couldn't help but think back to when he had seen her on the enormous god corpse. Then he recalled all her unusual behavior back on planet South Heaven. Of course, a thorough analysis couldn't leave out the fact that his earliest dealings with her stretched back to the Black Civ sect's blessed land. That was where he had found the meat jelly, and also where the lightning cauldron came from. Furthermore, sealed inside that land had also been the soul of Han Bei's ancestor. 1. Here are some links to the major events mentioned regarding Han Bei, as well as a few others. Meng Hao actually met Han Bei in the Black Civ sect, chapter 143. In the Blessed Land, she led an expedition into the cauldron which started in chapter 155. It was in that arc that Meng Hao met and later acquired the meat jelly. Han Bei released and merged with her ancestor in chapter 163. She had a very odd conversation with Meng Hao in chapter 247. In chapter 734, it's mentioned that she went missing after returning from the ancient demon immortal sect. Meng Hao went back to get the lightning cauldron in chapter 751. And finally, Meng Hao saw her on the corpse at the bottom of the ninth sea in chapter 1082. Those are just a few key chapters. She appeared in other many parts of the story, such as the Song clan search for a son-in-law and the ancient demon immortal sect arc. Meng Hao's eyes shone with bright light. If he had seen Han Bei in this situation before going to the necropolis, his analysis of the situation would still have occupied him, but the conclusions he would have arrived at would be far different than the truth that presented itself now. After his visit to the necropolis, though, he had learned much about many things. Because of that, he knew that Han Bei's method of escape contained a bit of the aura of all heaven, as well as some demonic power. That left him completely convinced that Han Bei had something to do with all heaven. Cold light flickered in Meng Hao's eyes as he suddenly flickered into motion and vanished. Meng Hao's clone was still on top of the mountain, looking up into the sky in the direction of where Han Bei had appeared. His eyes were narrowed, but after a moment they returned to normal. Meanwhile, Han Bei was still ashen-faced after being teleported back from the ninth sect. Her heart was filled with an uneasy premonition, as if a great disaster were heading her way. Deep within her, a sensation of imminent crisis was building up. People on planet Vast Expanse believed her to be from what was known as an ancient cultivator clan. After joining the sect, the cultivation base power she revealed was that of the peak of the immortal realm. However, after seeing Meng Hao and his clone, she felt something threatening looming behind her like a razor-sharp needle. What are you doing on planet Vast Expanse? I can't believe that you're the ninth paragon. How is that even possible? Han Bei's face was completely ashen. Her secluded meditation facilities were surrounded by countless restrictive spells, and yet that didn't leave her feeling safe at all. During the clone's tribulation, Meng Hao's true self had looked at her, and although his gaze was calm, it was filled with a brilliance that struck her heart with dread. And in fact, to feel dread was the correct response. After all, it wasn't very long after she returned to her secluded meditation facilities that rumbling sounds filled the air outside. Sounds were intense, but apparently they were being restricted to a small area, making it impossible for anyone outside to hear. However, the area where Han Bei was located was shaking so hard that mountains were rocking back and forth, and buildings were collapsing. However, the Feng Shui compass shone with brilliant light, blocking that force. If not, she would have been immediately engulfed in the destructive power that was buckling the surrounding area. Han Bei then looked up to see Meng Hao's true self standing there outside her secluded meditation facilities, prevented from entering by the Feng Shui compass shield. He wore a black robe and his expression was cold and icy. His hair floated in the wind, and a violet third eye could be seen on his forehead. Although it was closed, it still radiated majestic power. "It's always nice to reunite with old friends," he said coolly. "Why are you so afraid of me, Han Bei?" Han Bei shivered as she looked at Meng Hao, her expression filled with mixed emotions. She couldn't stop from shaking. She knew that her sudden appearance would be a big shock to Meng Hao, mainly because of the destruction of the mountain and sea realm. Everyone else was back on the mountain and sea butterfly, so why was she here, having assumed the identity of a holy daughter designate of the Vast Expanse school? Han Bei took a deep breath and put a calm expression on her face. She was an adept schemer, but this turn of events had been too sudden, which caused her to panic. However, now her mind had settled down and she rose to her feet, eyes flickering. She gave Meng Hao a curtsying bow, clasped hands and said, Hanbei offers greetings, ninth paragon. Then she looked up calmly into Meng Hao's eyes. However, this is Junior's first time meeting the exalted paragon. When you say old friends, what exactly is it that you mean? Meng Hao looked back at her, seemingly unfazed by her behavior. In fact, it corresponded exactly to the old Hanbei that he remembered. He suddenly smiled, although it was an icy cold smile. And his gaze came to rest on the ancient feng shui compass upon which he could sense the aura of all heaven. 1. Something that jumps out is that the words feng shui compass and all heaven share a character, which is the character luo, the one that basically means net. So all heaven is literally the luo heaven, and a feng shui compass is a luo disc. The Black Civ sect, of which Hanbei was originally a member, would be the Black Luo sect. That doesn't necessarily mean there is a connection between them all. I would never have been able to guess that you actually have something to do with all heaven, he said. He shook his head and flicked his sleeve. Well, it doesn't matter. Since you don't want to admit it, then I presume you must have some leverage to rely on, right? I'm curious to see what it is. By the way, as long as you're on planet Vast Expanse, it doesn't matter what identity you assume. Finding you would be as easy as flipping over my hand. With that, he paid her no more heed, vanishing back to Ninth Paragon City. His purpose in coming had been to confirm his suspicions. After laying eyes on the feng shui compass, he was now absolutely certain and didn't need any further confirmation. After Meng Hao left, Hanbei virtually collapsed, gasping for breath. After a long moment, she gritted her teeth. Thankfully, I prepared that life-saving backup plan all those years ago. It seems that now is the time to enact that plan. With that, she reached up and gently tapped her forehead. Her forehead then split apart, revealing a swath of pitch blackness within which floated a soul. It was not Hanbei's soul, but closer inspection revealed that it was indeed a woman. Her eyes were closed as if she were sleeping, but if Meng Hao were here, he would recognize her in an instant. Unexpectedly, it was the soul of Chu Yuyan. Years ago, when Chu Yuyan withered away into death, her soul dispersed. Meng Hao fought his way into the 8th mountain and sea to search for her, but the only thing he ever found was a tiny sliver of her soul. Back then, the clues had seemed to indicate that the rest of Chu Yuyan's soul had vanished into the starry sky. He thought that the problem was that he couldn't find it, but the truth was that Hanbei had secretly interfered and captured the soul. From then on, it became a life-saving measure for future use. In order to ensure that Chu Yuyan's soul didn't fade away into complete death, Hanbei had merged some of her own life soul into it, creating a sort of symbiotic state of existence between them. After many years of feeding Chu Yuyan's soul in such a way, it had become thoroughly intertwined with Hanbei's. Only someone with the power of transcendence could ever separate them. That meant that if Hanbei died, Chu Yuyan's soul would well and truly disperse. Hanbei sat there silently, mixed emotions on her face. She thought back to everything which had occurred between her and Meng Hao and sighed softly. Finally, she gritted her teeth. We have different standpoints and different missions. You want to see what my leverage is? Well, I'll show you. She waved her hand, sending Chu Yuyan's soul flying out where it vanished into heaven and earth. In the moment that the soul flew out, Meng Hao's true self locked onto it with divine sense. After realizing who it was, a tremor ran through him, and he felt as if countless lightning bolts were striking his mind. His eyes suddenly snapped shut, and a powerful force like a windstorm raged up from him. It swept out to cover all of Ninth Paragon City, then the entire half-planet, then all of its starry sky, and then the lands up above on planet Vast Expanse. Soon, all of planet Vast Expanse was shaking violently. The other paragons were shocked. The sect leader opened his eyes and looked out in astonishment. Of course, Jin Yunchen and Sha Jiudong and the others were equally stunned by Meng Hao's unleashing of energy. What is that psycho doing? Jin Yunchen, though, shivering. He quickly unleashed his cultivation base defensively, worried that Meng Hao was in a bad mood and might be looking to start a fight. Hanbei was also trembling inwardly, and yet continued to smile as calmly as ever. As long as you care, that's enough, she murmured to herself. The tempest lasted for only a moment before it vanished. Back in Ninth Paragon City, Meng Hao rose to his feet, eyes filled with reminiscence, grief, and other mixed emotions as he looked at the soul using his divine sense. Chu Yuyan, he murmured hoarsely. He followed her with his divine sense as she flew into the 9th continent, into the mortal world. She eventually entered the womb of a woman, as she began the cycle of reincarnation to become a person once again. After a long moment, Meng Hao retracted his divine sense. How could he not have noticed that Chu Yuyan's soul was intermixed with some of Han Bei's life soul? Although Chu Yuyan was independent, they existed symbiotically. Well, that is some good leverage. He finally closed his eyes, almost as if he had forgotten about Han Bei. Time passed. The immortal tribulation of Meng Hao's clone rocked all of the vast expanse school. Even the other paragons of similar rank to Meng Hao had taken note. From that day on, the name Fang Mu became well known in the vast expanse school. In 10 years, he went from mortal to immortal. He shook the ninth sect, rocked the vast expanse school, and word about him even spread throughout planet vast expanse. Everyone learned that an incredible chosen had appeared in the ninth sect. At the same time, many disciples of the vast expanse school began to pay close attention to Meng Hao's clone. That was especially true of the Blazing Sons among the chosen, who came to view him as a formidable opponent. However, some of the chosen disdained him, being of the belief that in terms of cultivation base, they were far beyond him. Who cares if you reach immortal ascension in 10 years? Don't tell me he's going to reach the ancient realm in 10 years too. Talk like that became the norm. He's a trifling immortal realm member of the junior generation, that's all. He might have nice latent talent, but so what? All 9 sects of the vast expanse school have a vast expanse shrine, and only by getting your name listed there are you truly a chosen. After the vast expanse shrine is the transcendence path. Only those who walk the transcendence path are the true Blazing Sons. Other than the 9th paragon, which paragon is there who hasn't left their footprint there? The path of cultivation is a long one. Rising up too quickly is a bad thing. This kid isn't that smart, is he? He'll definitely pay some painful consequences later. Chapter 1453. Enjoy yourself, Prince. Few people knew exactly how many immortal meridians Meng Hao's clone opened after his immortal tribulation. He didn't go on to make a big show of things, but instead went back into secluded meditation to practice cultivation. However, his heart was very unsettled because of the matter of Chu Yuyan. Hanbei planned things out years and years in advance. She fused her own life soul with Chu Yuyan, creating a symbiosis. Excellent leverage. After a long moment, he sighed. It took 3 days for him to settle his mind and heart. Afterward, he left for a time, and when he returned, he had the mastiff with him. Then, both of them went into meditative trances, continuing their cultivation in seclusion. Time passed. Another 10 years went by in the blink of an eye. During that time, Meng Hao's clone didn't leave the 9th sect. He stayed confined in meditation. Because he stayed out of the public eye, no one knew the level of his cultivation base or his progress. After the 10 years passed, no tribulation lightning descended, so people stopped worrying about whether or not he was chosen, and in fact, many people even forgot about him. Those who did remember him did so with scorn. He had no friends, nor any dealings with anyone. He remained in his subdivision of the 9th sect, focused completely on cultivation. To remain completely separated from the sect was an uncommon thing. Only people with a special status could do something like that. After all, Fang Mu was nothing more than an inner sect disciple. However, the 9th sect belonged to Meng Hao. All it took was a single word from his true self to that one particular Dao sovereign, indicating that Fang Mu was important and wasn't to be disturbed, and the matter was handled. Because of that, no one bothered his clone during those 10 years. The only company he had was the mastiff. Actually, Meng Hao's true self spent those 10 years in much the same way. He focused completely on gaining full enlightenment of all his hexing essences. With such a deep focus only on cultivation, his 20 years of work left him significantly more powerful than when he had entered the necropolis. Preparations for the second trip into the necropolis were still being made by the sect leader. Apparently, he wanted to be completely and utterly prepared. Obviously, he was completely intent on reaching the second land mass in this trip. During the 10 years, news spread that Han Bei had broken through from the immortal realm. Now that she was in the ancient realm, she was no longer a holy daughter designate. Somehow, she manipulated her way into becoming one of the vast expanse school's 9 holy daughters. The sect leader, despite being wrapped up in preparations for the necropolis, found time to provide some assistance and advice to Han Bei, who was very important to him. As for exactly what went on, Meng Hao didn't pay close attention. Another year passed, whereupon Meng Hao's clone emerged from secluded meditation and left the 9th sect. No one interfered with him. Most people only had a vague impression of who he was. Both he and the mastiff transformed into beams of light that shot off into the distance. A few days later, they appeared in a small town in the mortal world. It wasn't very large, but it was a bustling place. The streets were packed with people who scurried about doing all sorts of things. Meng Hao walked slowly through the town, wearing a green robe and looking every bit the scholar. Eventually, he came to a stop in front of the house of an average family. A warm look could be seen in his eyes as he looked at a group of youngsters playing outside the main gate. One of them was an 11-year-old girl, who wore a shy smile on her face as she played with her companions. His gaze seemed to stretch back hundreds of years into the past, recalling numerous events which had occurred once upon a time. It was currently autumn, and a crisp wind sent fallen leaves tumbling down the street. The setting sun was deep red color, filling the world with its warmth and casting Meng Hao's shadow long and far across the ground. The girl suddenly sensed that she was being watched, and she looked up at Meng Hao. She seemed a bit scared and quickly averted her eyes. A moment passed and he was still looking at her, making her even more frightened. She whispered something to her friends, then ran back into her house. Meng Hao laughed spontaneously, then took a deep breath, his eyes gleaming with reminiscence. "In your last life I owed you," he said softly. "In this life I'll pay that debt." Straightening his clothes, he walked up to the house and knocked on the gate. After a long moment the gate opened and he entered. There was no need for complicated formalities. On planet Vast Expanse, even mortals were aware of the existence of immortal beings and treated them with the utmost respect and veneration. Meng Hao mentioned that he wished to take this girl, whose name was Yanner, as an apprentice. He demonstrated some magical techniques to the girl's parents, who didn't hesitate for even a moment to give their assent. They looked very excited. A few days later, Meng Hao left, followed by a sad-looking girl and the mastiff. After a while, she couldn't hold back from asking, "Master, you really aren't a fraud?" In response to her question, Meng Hao bopped her on the top of her head with his palm. It hurt a little, but before she could say anything, her body was suddenly lifted up into the air. Wind blasted into her face, and when she looked down, she saw vast lands stretching out in all directions. Everything grew smaller and smaller, and her eyes grew wider and wider. After some time passed, she saw a boundless stretch of mountains, covered by countless buildings and structures. It was none other than the Ninth Sect. Suddenly, Meng Hao's soft voice could be heard in her ears. "From now on, you are the apprentice of Fang Mu, the one and only apprentice." From that day on, a girl lived in Fang Mu's secluded meditation facilities in his subdivision of the Ninth Sect. With her there, things were no longer so peaceful and quiet. She was naturally gifted when it came to cultivation, but most of that seemed focused on alchemy. Meng Hao also spent time teaching her other cultivation methods, as well as some of his own alchemy techniques. The girl's personality was very different from Meng Hao's. She enjoyed exploring the Ninth Sect and liked making friends. Soon, just about everyone in the subdivision knew that the Fang Mu, who had put on such a spectacular display about 10 years ago, had taken on an apprentice. 7 years passed. By now, it had been 18 years since Fang Mu's immortal tribulation, and it was also the year that his apprentice Yanner turned 18. She was a slender and elegant teenager. As she matured, she became more and more beautiful, and soon began to distinguish herself among the other female disciples of the sect. Because of her natural gift for cultivation, especially when it came to alchemy, she was already in late foundation establishment, just half a step away from core formation. Her Tao of alchemy was boundless and profound, enough to shake even some of the elders of the subdivision. Because of all of that, quite a few male disciples began to pursue the young Yanner. Of course, her personality was a bit more like a boy's. She was definitely not the graceful and subdued type. The only time she would pout and act like a girl was in front of Meng Hao. "Master, can I go, please? I've been waiting for this day forever." "Master, look, don't worry. Nothing's going to happen. Lots of my elder brothers and sisters from the sect are going to be there. We'll all be going together." Yanner was currently standing in front of Meng Hao making a request. She started out begging, but in the end, when he simply sat there in meditation, ignoring her, she started to get a bit irritated. "Aya, you old fogey, are you gonna let me go or not?" "How impudent," Meng Hao said, opening his eyes to glare at her. Yanner had become somewhat of a headache in recent years. In the beginning, she had treated him with awe and reverence, but that attitude had slowly faded away until it was now gone. Yanner was clearly not afraid of her master's glare. Smiling broadly, she hurried over and started to massage his shoulders. Eyes wide, she quietly began to plead again, in a very sweet and fawning voice. Master, everybody is saying that it's not just people from our subdivision who will be going to the bazaar. The whole sect will be there. In fact, people from the other continents will be coming too. The vast expanse school's first sect, second sect, basically all of the 9 sects are going to be there. It's going to be so exciting. Elder brother Bai Yun is also going. I heard that his name is in the top 100 of the vast expanse shrine. When Yanner mentioned elder brother Bai Yun, her eyes suddenly grew very bright. Meng Hao frowned, then sighed, aware that the reason his apprentice wanted to go to the bazaar was not merely the simple task of buying medicinal plants. Like most female disciples, she viewed the chosen members of the sect with awe. Bai Yun, who was one of the blazing sons of the 9th sect, was a good example. Unable to deal with her coaxing and prodding, he finally nodded and said, "Fine, fine, go ahead." Yanner was immediately delighted and even leaned forward and hugged him. Seeing her so delighted, Meng Hao's gaze softened a bit, and he thought about Chu Yuyan. In his last life, he had owed Chu Yuyan a debt of emotion. Unfortunately, in this life, his heart was already dead, and all he could give her was the relationship of a master and apprentice. Yanner left. The next day at dawn, she was in very high spirits as she met up with some of the other disciples of the subdivision, after which they all left together toward the Grand Bazaar, which was held every few years on the 9th continent. Meng Hao stayed in secluded meditation. His cultivation base was at a critical juncture, and he could make a breakthrough into the ancient realm at almost any time. Although he had remained in the immortal realm for quite some time, causing many people to forget about him, the reason was because of something that no one but him was aware of. When he had opened his immortal meridians, he actually exceeded the number previously reached by his true self, placing him at a terrifying level that nobody had ever reached before, not even in ancient times. That was why his progress in the immortal realm had been so slow. Because of my successive breakthroughs, the 9th hex is getting closer to completion. However, why is it that what I used to believe was perfect in the past now seems somewhat incomplete? Frowning, he proceeded with his cultivation. Even as he was focusing on cultivation, Yanner and her elder brothers and sisters had left the 9th sect and run into a group of disciples from the 8th sect. There were a dozen or so of them, all in the immortal realm. One of them was a handsome young man wearing very extravagant clothing. His friends clustered around him, and yet within his eyes could be seen a licentious gleam. He seemed like nothing more than a carefree young man, but the truth was that he had a unique position within the 8th sect. That was especially evident considering that he was being shadowed by a middle-aged cultivator who was obviously his Tao protector. The man made it seem as if his cultivation base were in the immortal realm, but he was actually a powerful Tao realm expert. Almost as soon as the two groups met, the young man took note of Yanner, and his eyes shone with both excitement and nefariousness. "What a wonderful-looking cultivation vessel," he said, grinning. His Tao protector also smiled. He was well aware of the proclivities of this young prince of his clan. Furthermore, the young man had a very high and important standing within the 8th sect, and even within the vast expanse school as a whole, there were few people who could compare. However, the Tao protector was also careful. Whenever the prince took a liking to a girl, he would always check her background. If he discovered any girl who had connections in the sect, he would advise the young man to abandon any pursuit. However, when it came to ordinary disciples, there were plenty of ways to make sure that no problems resulted. 1. The term cultivation vessel came up before with the original 9th paragon. It's a term from real Taoist sexual cultivation practices, which you can read about here. Check out section 2.5 for more information on how women are referred to as vessels or crucibles. The Tao protector pulled out a jade slip, examined it for a moment, then relaxed. "Her background is known, and she has no connections," he said. "She joined the sect a few years ago as the apprentice of someone named Fang Mu. Fang Mu went from being mortal to immortal in only 10 years and made somewhat of a stir at that time. However, even he doesn't have any connections. He's a small-time figure, nothing more than an inner sect disciple from a subdivision of the 9th sect. Enjoy yourself, Prince."